I want to welcome you to the Retro Rogues live show. Please pay attention to our warning graphic. It says that the Retro Rogues live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised, and we do advise it. I want to welcome you to the show. My name is Dave Beatty. I'm one of your hosts. For nearly the last 30 years, I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer. Worked on a lot of fun things that some people have heard of, such as the Retro Rogues Fanzine. That's right, the Retro Rogues Fanzine is available right now. We're going to be talking about that some more here in just a few minutes. But I want to welcome back my co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks hopefully watching or listening at home some of the fun things you have worked on as a creative professional.
Yes, hello everyone. I am Eric Alexander, also known as Base God 14. That's Base God 14, BASSGOD 14. That's Bass God, not Bass God. It's like bass, like a bass guitar. And I am the co-host of Retro Rogues Live. I am also the chief financial officer of Bad Bob Productions, small production company in Arizona. And I am also the associate producer of the feature film Occupants, which features Star Trek Voyager actor Robert Picardo and is currently available for free on Tubi.
Very cool. You know what? I don't think we have enough Retro Rogues logos on this screen. We need some more. Very soon, there will be even more. It's going to be so much that you're just going to think, you know what? I'd love to have like a Retro Rogues t-shirt or a hat or something like that. And hopefully we'll be making that happen hopefully soon. But enough about that. Right off the top, hi, James. Glad to see you're here. James says, hey, guys. Hi back. Right off the top, we're going to talk about the Retro Rogues Fanzine. I want to again encourage people. Please tell people about it. Please continue to share the link. Download the file, email it to people. Let's get the word out about the Retro Rogues Fanzine. Production has already started on the second edition. That's right. Issue number 2 production has already started. And I actually have an exciting announcement about it. If you wouldn't mind sharing my screen, Eric. So I am happy to announce that Elemental Knights, this is a project that my brother Ronnie Shinks and I had been working on for many, many years ago, and we've been developing this for quite some time, and we've been trying to figure out how we wanted to roll it out, what we wanted to do with it, and I had a conversation, I've had several conversations with him about what kind of fun things that we could probably do in the Retro Rogues Fanzine. And after a little bit of debate and discussion, we decided, you know what? It'd be really fun to roll out Elemental Knights as basically an additional story. So as it currently stands, those of you that enjoyed the fanzine, I want you to get excited because in addition to continuing the Immortal Champion storyline, which is basically a Star God story that's running right now, we are also going to have an Elemental Knights story running. And there are two more other stories being developed right now. But this is the one I'm ready to talk about right now. And ironically enough, or surprisingly enough, there's actually some other stuff to show for this. So, I want you all to meet the Red Knight. This is the Red Knight from Elemental Knights. The Elemental Knights are, if you could imagine, it's sort of an Ultraman, sort of Shogun Warriors, Power Rangers kind of idea. But this is the Red Knight. He's one of the characters you'll be meeting in Elemental Knights. And then, through the magic of live streaming television, this is actually a preview of one of the pages from that story. Can you believe it? That's right. If you'll notice, this features some other interesting connections to some other things that are going on. It's almost like there's this weird interconnected shared universe thing happening in the Retro Rogues fanzine. I can't imagine how that's happening. It's like, it's going to be really interesting. It's like all these things are somehow connected together, like one big shared universe. But anyhow, enough about that. I want everyone to get excited. Again, coming to the Retro Rogues fanzine, we're going to have Elemental Knights. So, Eric, I know I probably woke you up in the middle of the night talking about this because I was so excited about it. But what did you think? Because you've seen more of Elemental Knights than what I just showed everyone here. Because there's actually quite a bit that was done on this. And we're going to retool a little bit of it, and we're going to finish it and polish it up and roll it out for people to finally get to read.
Well, I'm totally looking forward to it. You know, as you mentioned, this kind of idea of this like sort of a shared universe, sort of the gosh, I don't know what the term would be, Dave. But, I'm not sure
I
what
don't
you would
either.
call it exactly. The RRU, maybe
Yes, yes.
something like
The
that.
Retro Rogues
But
universe.
yeah, exactly, something along those lines. I think it's really cool. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. Just like everybody else, I think it's going to be awesome. It's kind of cool to have some multiple different strips running in the fanzine. Kind of gives it a little bit of that 2000 AD vibe, I think. So I think that's cool.
And it's going to be interesting too because there's a new comics artist who's trying to emerge, and we've been talking for quite some time. He's going to be actually helping to produce one of these. My brother has actually previously been published in Bushy Tales, and this will be his other foray into comics writing, which I know is something he loves. And then I've been talking to James Stone about possibly doing something for the magazine as well, beyond also contributing some spot illustrations like he did last time, which he's also graciously agreed to do. So I'm very, very excited for all this. It's going to be really fun. I've always loved anthologies, and you see them and everything, and I always thought, man, it'd be fun to work on an anthology. And the intention wasn't to have the magazine be an anthology, but I love the idea of having all these different kinds of stories and characters, that are either connected directly or indirectly, and for people to get to kind of explore a new kind of universe, full of interesting characters. And so I'm very excited for this. When everybody else get excited about it, as we continue to work on the Retro Rogues fanzine, I'll have more announcements about who our content creator is going to be, who our artist guest is going to be, such on and so forth. We're going to have more details about that coming up. I did tease a little bit about that the last episode, but we're going to try and actually bring them on the show and actually have them on the show too. So hopefully, our viewers and our listeners can actually kind of get to meet them a little bit and then learn more about them. Actually, the Retro Rogues fanzine as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the plan, and I think it's a good one, and we're sticking to it. So
yeah. Oh, so if that's good, are we good to segue over to our main show topic, or topic number one?
Yes, I think we're good to go.
All right. Okay. So we're going to start out this episode talking about the latest episode of the Disney Gallery series, Star Wars: The Mandalorian. This episode was all about technology, and also unironically called technology. I think this is the one that Eric and I had previously mentioned we were most curious about. So tell me, Eric, what were your initial impressions about the Disney Gallery Star Wars episode, The Mandalorian, about technology?
Well, as you mentioned, this is something that I personally had been looking forward to. And the main topic, actually, they could have just called it The Wall. They didn't necessarily have to call it technology, because although they kind of explain the background of exactly what that wall is all about, the background wall of the Mandalorian. That, for those of you that aren't aware of that, they did not shoot on practical locations. In other words, they didn't do location shooting for the Mandalorian. At least none that they were talking about. Pretty much everything was done in the studio with these magic walls, if you will. And this is something Dave has been talking about quite a bit, because he was the one, I think, that first kind of heard about it in an article and brought it up, that they were doing this. And it's a really interesting process. And like I said, they could have called it The Wall, because they really kind of got into the background of how that technology came to be. And they also got into a little bit of the other elements that were needed to incorporate that system, in order for it to work. So it was really interesting to me. It definitely is technical. Technology is a good name for this episode. But it's something that I was really looking forward to, and I felt like I did get quite a lot of insight into that process. In particular, how Favre himself kind of pioneered the process based on his experiences with his previous films, in particular The Jungle Book and then also with the Lion King, which I found was really interesting. But Dave, like I said, you were the one that first kind of told me about this technology that they were using on the Mandalorian. So I'm obviously very curious about what you thought of this episode, since that's pretty much what the entire episode was about.
Well, what was interesting about it, and they referred to it as volume. I guess that's what they're calling this technological thing that they've created. At least that's how they were referring to that within the episode itself. I was surprised because I thought all they were doing was just sort of like a clever form of what do they used to call it? What's it called? I had it in my head, and whenever I try to say it, it leaves me. Backdrop projection or back screen projection or whatever. And I thought it was just a giant video wall that they were basically just doing that with. Kind of like when you watch the old black and white films from back in the day and you see the person driving their car and the thing in the background doesn't really quite sync up. If that is too dated a reference for you, Quentin Tarantino uses it in a lot of his films as well. But the idea is that, or even classic Battlestar Galactica, a lot of the shots with the Vipers is someone in a practical Viper cockpit, and then the space scene with the Cylon ships or whatever off to the side that you see that they're interacting with, those are actually, again, they're projected on the screen. And then the actors, they try and time the special effects and everything with it. So it is kind of like that, but it's actually much more complex than I ever realized, because apparently somehow within the show they talk about they're using the Unreal game engine, and somehow between the Unreal game engine and this wall thing they call the volume, which acts as a set extension, they're able to create these really amazing images. And one of the really coolest things they talked about was the fact that Favreau was talking about that a lot of times, for example, like C-3PO, because he's very shiny, a lot of times when you do a lot of green screen and blue screen work, they have a lot of issues with that because you can see the reflections, in the metal surfaces. And so they have to go in and post and actually digitally remove all that stuff and try and take it out or change it or whatever. And talked about how time consuming and complicated and costly sometimes those kind of, sort of digital band-aids or fixes sometimes are. But with this technique, because the screen is reflecting everything, then the reflections in the metal surfaces are not a problem. You can actually lean into it, and it helps them to feel like they're actually more in the world. And then it goes even further, because they talked about how they can use all this data and this information, and they can actually light the characters on the set. So for the lighting, for the actors, for everyone, it's a much more immersive experience. And they really feel like they're on an actual physical set, and they know what they're reacting to, and it helps them to better read the scene, so they can focus a little bit more on their performance and their experience. Whereas before, you always heard those stories when you watched the behind the scenes featurettes, and the guy's got something on a stick. This is the monster. Look at the monster. Whereas in this, because of how they're doing it, as far as the sets and stuff are involved, they know what it is that they're trying to react to, because they can actually see it. I found this whole thing to be terribly interesting. And if you're enjoying The Mandalorian, I couldn't recommend this series enough. It's a lot of fun. This one was very, very interesting. But I was a little disheartened because I thought that what they were doing could be a little bit more replicatable, maybe on a little bit of a budget. But when I heard them talking about how that they're using sort of this complex motion control idea and virtual cameras using the Unreal game engine, actually sitting in the actual world that they've basically either somehow digitally created or filmed or whatever, I was like going, wow, that's incredible. That's way more complex than I thought it was going to be. So I think some of my crazy ideas still might work, but they're just not going to work the way I originally thought. It's much more complex than I had originally imagined this whole thing would be.
Well, it's interesting because one of my big criticisms of the Lion King is that it's not a live action movie, that it's nothing more than a more realistic looking animated film. And it was neat to see Favreau talk about the process of making the Lion King a little bit and how it was relevant to the Mandalorian, because the way they did the Lion King was that instead of sort of doing, I guess what you would say is traditional animation, where you create these images and you're sort of just creating these images, and you're sort of deciding as you're creating them, how you want it to look, right? That's kind of the way animation is done. In other words, somebody comes up with some sketches and you say, okay, this is going to be how we're going to make it look. This is going to be the shot. Okay, now let's make it. Let's make the shot. Well, because they started using this game engine technology and they were using it in The Lion King, that's where that game engine technology becomes so relevant. What they were doing was they had this fully rendered world, and then Favre could literally sit like on a VR headset and he could decide where the camera was going to be shooting with essentially a virtual camera, which I found that to be quite fascinating. So the idea is that you create a 360-degree virtual world. Now the director can put himself in it with a pair of VR goggles and a VR controller, and he can decide what it is we're seeing. And ironically, it kind of reminds me of why things like Twitch are popular, because we've been trying to make some impact on Twitch, which is very hard, because I'll be honest, in a lot of ways I don't understand Twitch, but I do understand that because I've done some of the more modern, more advanced games like the Fallout games, where they are these fully rendered 3D worlds that you can walk around in. I understand the concept, and I understand why that's appealing to people, because when you're watching somebody play a video game like that, you don't know where the player is going to go. You don't know what direction he's going to go in and what he's going to decide to do. It's up to him or her, whoever's playing the game, and therefore every time you watch it, it's kind of unique. It's kind of a unique experience. Even if you played the game yourself, even if you know all the quests and all that kind of stuff, all the information, it still can be a lot of fun to watch somebody else doing that. And essentially, that's what The Lion King is. It's just a big, giant, super well-rendered video game, and it's basically Favreau deciding what you get to see. It's not interactive. It's interactive for him, but he's basically just recording. He's recording game footage. That's what I found fascinating. I also found it fascinating. I'm just, I can't help it. I can't help myself. I found it fascinating that Kathleen Kennedy had to have that concept kind of explained to her, because obviously she had no freaking clue. I don't know if she knows what a video game is anymore. But anyway, that was her big question that I saw at the round table there. And I don't know why she's there. I got to say that. I'm just going to say I don't know why she's there, what she contributes exactly. But no, I get it. I think it's interesting. Like I said, I'm one of those people that was really kind of, I don't know, kind of negative about The Lion King, and then realizing what it is that they actually did, I'm like, that's kind of fascinating. That's actually interesting. That's like a totally different way of making a movie, making an animated film, And then the idea that they incorporated this into live action and essentially created a not three-dimensional, because obviously you still have one of the walls, obviously, that is not, that you have the physical camera in. But the other three walls, they basically are creating this box. That's what the volume is. The volume is basically a box. It's a studio. And you have basically three sides that are fully rendered by these screens. So you can see the world. And because of the game technology, the game engine technology, the camera can interact with the background. So when the director of photography is physically moving the camera, the background moves appropriately with the camera. It knows where the space is. And that is like, I see how that can just be incredibly game-changing when it comes to filmmaking, because it really does look seamless. I thought I thought all of them, pretty much. I pretty much thought every single scene that was outside, I thought it was shot, on location somewhere, in the desert or something like that. I didn't realize that these were all completely done within a, in studio environment like that. I mean, it's amazing to me. And there is still a lot of physical set. There's certainly more physical set than what you would see in a typical, like green screen setup. Like if you've seen behind the scenes of the prequels, for instance, it's like, holy cow, like almost nothing is real. It's like the only thing that's real are things that they're physically touching. Everything else is completely green or blued out, There's still a substantial amount of an actual practical set that they build as well. For instance, they talked about the Mandalorian ship. a good half of it is still real. You know what I mean? It's just that the top is cut off, and the top comes up to that roof, and that fills in the rest of the ship, But it's an amazing way to sort of like integrate those two technologies together. I'm hoping and I'm thinking that the next episode they're going to focus more on those practical effects, those practical sets, all those other kinds of things, because obviously this is not just your typical sort of green screen type of setup, and they talk about that quite a bit. Favreau talks about that in the beginning because he had quite a bit of experience with green screen, especially with Iron Man and obviously the Jungle Book. And in the Jungle Book, they tried to do some of that back screen sort of in the more, I guess, traditional way that you were talking about. And he was kind of saying it didn't really quite work. So they didn't give up on it, which I think is interesting. So they kept at it, and as the hardware got better, I think that was the key. Is as the hardware got better, the actual physical screens that they now have available, they realized they could actually do this, and it's just seamless. I just think the result is just absolutely seamless. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, I found the whole process to be terribly interesting. We do have a couple comments. Peggy says that sounds really cool, but playing with Google's, I wish she means goggles. Google's makes shiver with snows like Game Sword Online. The camera angle for Lion King is cool, but remaking it, however, for fight scenes, okay. Not quite. Are you following, Eric?
Yeah, I understand because I've actually played VR. Playing with goggles, it can make for kind of a weird effect. You know what I mean? I don't have a lot of experience with VR games. I do have a VR headset for my PlayStation 4. But yeah, the camera angles as far as the Lion King and stuff like that. Yeah, I think that's kind of where they really really did some interesting stuff. And like I said, I didn't realize until I watched this thing, I didn't realize how they did it. With fight scenes and things like that, I think it can add some definite potential as well, particularly actually with the back screen, because of what I mentioned, that with fight scenes, your characters have to move a lot, obviously. And if you're able to sort of do that in real time and the camera can move and you don't have to constantly set up every single shot so that it doesn't look really hokey, the background doesn't look all weird, that's like game changing, in terms of being able to do that on a set. And then Mike Lombard did say, just stopping in to listen a bit, but getting called away to work. Be well, guys. Mike, be safe at work. I hope all goes well there. Thank you for stopping by. But yeah, it's a really interesting technology. It really is.
And I was just gonna say, I actually haven't seen The Lion King. My wife kind of was just like, I don't want to watch that, so I haven't seen it. The new one. I did, however, see Jungle Book, and I quite liked Jungle Book, and I own Jungle Book actually. Yeah, I mean, my experience with VR is extremely limited. I remember the first time I tried to play a VR type game was actually many years ago. It was way before. I'm sure the technology is much better now, and it was actually a fighting game, like a 2-person, like a Mortal Kombat Street Fighter type game, and I was very excited to try it out, and I was just sort of kind of demoralized because what it was is you put these sensors on your hands and your feet. You put these little weird helmet thing. It was more of a helmet than goggles at that point, and you put this thing on. And then theoretically you would go through the motions. Well, at that time, I was still pretty active in martial arts. I think I weighed maybe 185 pounds, and actually I actually fought in a tournament that year and a bunch of other stuff. So I was very, very physically active and loved martial arts. And I loved martial arts fighting games, things like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter. So I was very excited to try this thing because I thought, wow, this would be amazing, because if it can follow along with me, this will be really kind of fun, right? But of course, it just registered just basic movement. And I was trying to do all this complicated kind of stuff. And then my opponent was basically hardly doing anything except just kind of doing like a really cruddy jab, and actually defeated me because I discovered that there was another sensor or something that just whenever you did the motion, it would automatically attack. It didn't matter what you did. You didn't have to do anything complicated. I was like, well, this is just trash. So I have had no interest in exploring VR since that experience, because I was like going, well, this is lame. I'll just go play an actual, like, arcade and buttons and do it that way. Or I'll just do it for reason.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because what you're talking about is the integration of the VR with the motion controls. That's the problem. You know what I mean? The problem is the integration of the motion controls with the VR. In fact, I think most modern VR games kind of don't even try to go there right now. They have kind of these different kind of controllers that are more meant to fit in with VR than they are to fit in with the real world, if that makes sense. So in other words, you're not doing realistic movements. You're doing movements that make more sense so that the VR works right. So it's like, you can think of it this way. I mean, anybody who's had a Wii U knows that with the Wii U bowling, if you want to really have fun, you actually act like you're bowling, but you don't have to. You can sit on your couch and you can just flick your wrist, and you can actually win at the bowling and actually do better than the people that are trying to like actually bowl, at least do the motions of the bowling. It's the same kind of thing. And, in regards to the Mandalorian and to this project, what I thought was interesting and what's so game changing about it is that it's the way that the camera itself knows where it's at, so that when the operator is moving the camera, the background is also moving with the operator. You know what I mean? That's what's so game changing about this, and that's the integration that's so interesting to me.
No, it's very, very interesting. And that's the part, honestly, of the technology side of this, because I was curious to see how much of it I could hold on to have a basic understanding of. And when they started talking about that, it's like, I know what the Unreal game engine is, and I've played a few games. I think the DC versus Mortal Kombat game I played used the Unreal Engine. So I'm somewhat familiar with it. But in terms of, wandering within a world beyond, something like, Grand Theft Auto or something, I'm not too terribly versed. And like I said, I had such a bad experience with VR back in the day. I wasn't terribly interested in it. I still don't have much of an interest in it. But I do find what they're doing with The Mandalorian to be very interesting. And I was, trying to wrap my head around some of the concepts, and I was like, oh, wow, I knew it was going to be technical, but it was way more technical than I thought it was going to be. And then we do have another comment actually from Peggy Oakes. She asks, do you know if Mulan will have used some of this tech for the action sequences? I'm going to tell you, Peggy, I have no idea. What about you, Eric? Had you heard anything about if they might be? My understanding with Mulan is that they're really. Go ahead.
We had a technical hiccup there, but I'm not actually really sure what they're doing for Mulan as far as their filming technique. I would have assumed that they're trying to make it as, quote, real as possible, with actual, on location, shots and things like that, where they're trying to use a massive number of actors and trying to limit the amount of CGI. But I don't know. That's just pure speculation on my part. That's what I would do, because it's like, well, what's the point of again, this is why I had problems with The Lion King. What's the point of making a live action movie if it's not going to be live action? If it's going to be a bunch of CGI, what's the point? Now, that said, I still think, let me be clear. I'm not going to go out and watch Lion King now because of The Mandalorian. I think that the process by which it was made is fascinating, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate it more, than I guess, as it's being its own thing and not just traditional animation. But it's still animation. Okay, that's still, a video game is still animation, unless, video game is still animation. That's the bottom line. So it's not real. So I'd be curious actually to see what they decide to do with Mulan, because I think that's a good point. Because again, my big beef with the Lion King, and also even with Jungle Book to some extent, is that's not really live action. They're not using real animals. You know what I mean? It's not. It's just a better rendered cartoon. That's the way that I look at it. Despite the fact that I do respect the technology, especially more so now. Peggy had another thing she said, where it says fix. She said fix. That sounds really cool. But playing with goggles makes me. Oh, I'm sorry. That was the same comment over again. She said, agreed. Much rather have live action versus the CGI. There was a repeat there of the comments. But yeah, that's my thing. Is I would like to see Mulan be very practical, with real fight scenes and all that kind of stuff. And otherwise, what's the point? We already saw a great animated version of it, and I actually like Mulan quite a bit. I actually enjoy the animated film quite a bit. So I don't see the point of doing something live action if it's not live action. I know I'm weird that way.
Well, no, I was going to say, my understanding is with Mulan that there are a lot of live action sequences, and that they are investing heavily in the film, because I know that film is intended to hopefully have to have an impact on the worldwide box office. You know what I mean? And specifically to try and cater a little bit more directly to China as an audience, as moviegoers. So I would imagine that there's been a substantial investment in doing a lot of it with practical effects and trying to have it be as real world yet fantastical and entertaining as they can make it. So, and I do think I remembered hearing something about that they have a lot of extras, and it's a pretty amazing live shoot is. But I'll be honest with you, I haven't dug too far into it. It might be something actually to investigate a little bit more actually for next week's show to see what we can discover, to actually specifically address that. But no, my understanding is that they have a lot of extras, and it's a very large production, and that's meant again to hopefully cater to the Chinese audience, and hopefully the worldwide box office too, and try and bring as many people in with an amazing spectacle, yet traditional, faithful, adaptation of the story of Mulan. So, and then Peggy has a few more comments. She mentions that The Lion King is more animation, Dumbo and Lady and the Tramp also, but she says that she did like Aladdin. And then she also says that the fight scenes in The Mandalorian were really well done. And I would have to agree. They talked a little bit more about that in the last episode. They talked about the different gentlemen that stand in sometimes for Pedro Pascal, or sounds like standing for Pedro Pascal quite a lot. One of them being related to the late great Western actor John Wayne, which I thought was terribly interesting. I think it's his grandson, if I remember correctly. He does a lot of the. It was interesting because they had a very brief shot of him actually roping something, but he does a lot of the grappling hook stuff and does a lot of the gunplay. And then there's another gentleman who actually does. If I remember correctly, they mentioned capoeira and jiu-jitsu, which is a very, very interesting combination. I've always been terribly fascinated with capoeira, which actually comes from Brazil, which is a martial art. It's very heavily influenced by dance and rhythm and learning the rhythms of your opponent. There's a really great film I've always loved with Mark Dacascos called Only the Strong, that has a lot to do with capoeira. When I think capoeira, I think of the movie Only the Strong. But I've always loved that martial art. It's really, really interesting the way that they move the body and channel their energy into their various attacks and strikes, and it's very dynamic and entertaining with all the jumping kicks and everything. So it'll be curious to see as we move forward the Mandalorian as they begin to try and ramp up what they're doing with the fight scenes, what kind of fun stuff they're going to do, because capoeira is a very dynamic and entertaining martial art to watch. And also, I know from having been kicked in the head by a capoeira maestre, actually on a cruise ship on the way to Jamaica many, many years ago. Oh, folks, the stories I could tell you. he kicked me in the head. I didn't see it coming, and definitely rang my bell. So I can tell you it's a very powerful martial art too. So,
Oh wow.
And then Peggy has another comment too. She says Disney Plus did a blip on Mulan discussing the scope of the movie and mostly female run crew. And that was the same one I was referencing, because I think I'd seen that too. And my understanding is, again, it's a very expansive, with a lot of extras, and that they're doing something really interesting with it, live action. And I'm sure there'll be some of it will be, CG to augment, some of the live action, shots, and extend some of the sets and all those kind of fun things to just help, make it a little bit, more fantastical. But, depending upon if they're actually filming in China, I mean, there's so many amazing, very rarely seen parts of China. It could be fantastical enough of its own. I mean, so we'll have to just wait and see. But yeah, that's all I got to say about that, I think. And then James Stone comments. He chimes in and says, "Hey, Team Retro. Hey, James.
Good to see you, James.
Glad to see we got some people in the Rogues Gallery sounding off. Very cool. So I'll go ahead and give you my final pass here on the Disney Gallery of Star Wars Mandalorian. We're obviously going to hopefully continue to review these as we move forward, but I've been really, really enjoying these, and this one was really, really interesting. And I do, honestly, in my head, I want to learn a little bit more about this technology and what they're doing. It's really, really interesting to me how they're able to create that kind of a world and the methods in which they're using. I find this terribly, terribly interesting. So if you have enjoyed The Mandalorian, you've got a subscription to Disney Plus, I think this is worth watching. They also have there's that prop show. I can't remember the name of it. That one's really interesting too. And I've been really enjoying a lot of this new content that Disney Plus has been rolling out. So that's my final pass on this. Is if you're curious about it, if you enjoyed The Mandalorian, give the Star Wars Gallery, Star Wars Mandalorian little documentary featurettes, give it a shot. I think you might enjoy it. So, Eric, what's your final take on this particular episode of the Disney Gallery, The Mandalorian?
Well, if you want to know about an interesting new facet of filmmaking, this is a great episode to watch, because this is, like I said, like we've kind of mentioned, these are technologies that have basically been kind of pieced together, and they've been there for a while in various forms. Like we talked about the whole back screen thing. Gosh, that's from the beginning of filmmaking. They've been doing that. But these guys are just doing it so much better, and they're incorporating things like video game technology, VR, and things like that to make it even better and make it more realistic. But as I mentioned before, even as you see in this episode, they still have a lot of practical effects. And the next episode is actually called Practical. So I am hoping that they are going to talk a little bit more about things like the actual sets and more importantly for me, a lot of the puppetry. I'm really interested in that. Of course, and anybody who knows me knows that I love Baby Yoda. And so I'm very interested in Baby Yoda himself, how he's constructed, how he works, all that kind of stuff. And I know that's very much a practical effect. I know IG-11, I think, was in many regards also a practical effect. There were lots of practical set pieces. Carl Weathers in this episode talks about how immersive that lava scene is, where they're in the lava lake, where he really felt like they were moving, and they weren't moving, but he felt like they were because literally the way the set is, the images were all moving around him. So it was actually creating that sense that they actually were moving, even though they were not. So it's kind of interesting. So the next episode is Practical, and I am definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm really hoping they'll show us kind of the Baby Yoda puppet and the Practical. I mean, I would imagine that's one of the things they're going to talk about, because that's their big breakout star, and he is a practical puppet, which I think is really kind of, it's interesting with the character of Yoda. He started out as a puppet, and then when they did the Phantom Menace, they were trying to, do a digital version of that character, and it kind of worked, but kind of didn't work. and then they actually returned back to trying to do more stuff with the puppet and bringing the puppet back. And it's interesting how here on The Mandalorian, the puppet lives on. I just feel like that Yoda's species is best represented with a puppet than CGI, it seems like. So interesting.
Depends on what you want to do with them. If you want them to fight Count Dooku, I don't think the puppet's going to work very well. But when it comes to the way that they, I think that there's a very obvious reason of why they film. Well, I think there's an obvious reason why Baby Yoda's an infant. I don't know if they're going to talk about that, but that would be my speculation. You know what I mean? As far as the way he moves and all that kind of stuff. But Peggy mentions that I'm sure the show will win awards for the intertwining of all this technology, and I would be amazed if it didn't. I don't know how it couldn't. You know what I mean? Unless there's just some sort of a crazy anti-Star Wars or anti-Disney bias. You know what I mean? Because clearly this technology is game changing, and obviously it absolutely should win all sorts of awards. And PJ's in the house. Orville Nation says, "Love Retro Rogues. You guys are the best." We love Orville Nation, and actually, PJ, we think you're the best. So it's kind of like a mutual admiration society here, you know. And by the way, Peggy, you are not bugging us with any typing mistakes. We will figure it out. It's all good. So you keep typing away, and you say whatever you want, and we'll do our best to interpret it. If because I got the clumsy fingers too, so I understand that. No worries there. No worries there.
Yeah, I've turned hunt and peck into a fine art, yet I am prone to more than my fair share of mistakes as well. So it's you're in good company. I think we're all kind of in the same boat. We're just talking about stuff we love. Sometimes I get a little too excited. I'm like, oh, well, let me tell you about this, and I go, oh, that's not what I meant. Stop, let me change that. So it's all good.
That happens to me all the time when I'm watching somebody else's show, somebody else's live show. That happens all the time. Somebody will make a point, and I'm like, I want to talk about that one point, and they've already kind of moved on.
Yeah.
And then of course you're kind of behind everything else, and then of course you're behind on the comments and all that stuff. So, all we can do is we try to do our best, so we make sure that we address as much as we can, right? So it's just the name of the game. It's just the way it goes.
Yeah. Do we think we're good here with the to move on to
well, we're not done with the love. Peggy says one big loving family. One big loving family of fun loving nerds. That's the vibe that we want. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then James says Dave Filoni needs his own Star Wars film. His Clone Wars series and finale was really great. Now, Dave, you watched the Clone Wars series finale, didn't you?
I loved it. There is a moment actually with, of all people, Vader, that I found myself incredibly touched by. When you think about what the significance of that moment means for Anakin, because it really does feel, when you're watching that finale, and spoiler alert, it really does feel in that moment that you can almost kind of see Anakin saying goodbye to his former life, because I think at that moment he realized his life as it was is truly over, and he is moving into a new place. It's powerful. That finale is powerful, especially if you love the Clone Wars, if you love Ahsoka. If you're down with the clone troopers and everything that they did with them. That's one of the things I love about the Clone Wars. I like the Attack of the Clones movie, the prequel movie. I'm one of those people. I kind of like the prequels. I don't. I mean, are they perfect? It's like, no, but nothing's perfect. But I try to look at the things I enjoy more than the things that sometimes I don't, unless the thing can't stop sticking it in your face. That's different. When a production just keeps sticking something you don't like in your face, that's when I can't watch it. And that's when I'm just kind of like, okay, I can't do this. But I enjoyed Attack of the Clones when it originally came out. I still watch it from time to time. But man, what they've done with the Clone Wars, whether you want to talk about Genndy Tartakovsky's animated series, it were the little mini shorts that they cut together that originally led into Revenge of the Sith, or if you want to talk about this amazing thing they've done with the Clone Wars, the CG animated. I mean, it's all amazing. It's all amazing. I found that finale, having watched the Clone Wars, I found it incredibly moving. I found myself touched in a pretty powerful way for what it means for all those characters, and I'm dying to see what they're going to do. Hopefully with Ahsoka, even if it's a brief cameo in The Mandalorian coming up in season 2. I'm very curious to see what they do with her character and where she is at this time in her life. I'm very, very curious to see it.
James brings up an interesting point. He says, crazy how Anakin was better fleshed out than in the films, and I assume he means in the Clone Wars. Now, I don't claim to be any kind of Clone Wars expert. I've mentioned this before, that I actually am a fan of the Clone Wars film in terms I actually saw it in the theater. I actually enjoyed it. I am someone who enjoys the prequels, including Episode 1. In fact, I think the duel in Episode 1 is the best duel in Star Wars, and I will challenge anybody on that. I think that it's freaking awesome. So I have a lot of love for the prequels, and I'm a big Hayden Christensen defender. So James, you and I might be at odds a little bit, because I find a lot of fans who are very dismissive of Hayden Christensen's performance in the prequels. And I think he did awesome. I actually really love Revenge of the Sith. In fact, somebody was asking about, they did a poll where they were asking about your favorite, 3 Star Wars movies. And of course, the debates tend to go either prequels, original trilogy, or Disney Wars, right? That seems to be where everybody goes. And I said, you know what my favorite is? I made up my own trilogy. I like the Death Star trilogy, I call it. It's Revenge of the Sith, Rogue One, and the original Star Wars. That's my favorite 3 Star Wars movies right there. No Empire. Definitely no other Disney Wars. None of that garbage. But that's what I like, because I also like to be different. I don't know. What do you think? Because you can comment about that better, because you're Dave, because you're someone who does like the prequels and you really like the Clone Wars animated series. What do you think of that? As far as, do you feel that Anakin was much better fleshed out in the animated series than in the prequels?
I think that what the Clone Wars does, it's like what they talked about with that volume thing. It's an amazing extension of what they did in the prequels. That's how I look at what they did in Clone Wars. It's not that it's necessarily, I would say, better, but I agree with James. I do love what they did with continuing to flesh out his character. I think there's just some amazing moments that we got to see in the Clone Wars that we didn't really get to see necessarily in the prequels. And part of that could have been time. Part of that could have been story beats, But that last little scene, how it ends, when you see sort of what happens with Ahsoka, and then you see what happens actually with Anakin, as Vader. I mean, it's powerful. It's amazing. And I loved it. And then James actually does state, he says that, no, I liked him fine, just an observation. And I agree with you, James. I liked what Hayden Christensen did with it. I don't have a lot of problems. I mean, I know some people kind of bag on a little bit, but again, like I said, I'm one of those people, for example, like I can love and appreciate, the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie. Is it the world's greatest Punisher movie? It's like, maybe it's not. But as an Elseworld story, because that's the best way to view sometimes some of these films, as an Elseworld story, what do you think of it then? I'm like, oh, it's pretty cool. I like it.
There's one other point. There's one other point you have to make there, though, is that he originated the role. And anytime somebody has to originate the role and doesn't have anybody else to compare to, I'm not trying to say that Thomas Jane based his Punisher on Dolph Lundgren at all. I don't know if you ever saw the movie, but I'm just saying, when somebody else has done it, no matter what, it makes it different. Whether you watched it or not, whether you're familiar with the material or not, it just makes it different. When somebody else originated the role, and then you come along and then you do it later, well, you're supposed to do it better. If you came, you're building on somebody else's legacy, right? So if you're not better, then that's kind of that's kind of bad on you, So I mean, so you got to take those kind of things with a grain of salt. Sometimes when somebody originates a role, it's it's sort of what's the term I'm looking for? It's like it's in the proto stage of development. You know what I mean? It hasn't
Right.
been perfected yet because this is the first time we're seeing it. And
Yeah.
I also have a sort of a love for that Dolph Lundgren Punisher, because that's the first time I saw Punisher live action. You know, so that's just going to always be something. And I've always liked Dolph Lundgren, so I'm always going to kind of like that. You know,
And I feel like that he does a really great job. I especially like that scene, and I brought this up on the show before. We should do the Punisher at some point. um, I love that scene where he's in the prison, and Louis Gossett Jr.'s character is asking him, and he's like, "What do you call was it however many murders in 5 years?" And he's just got this just stone cold killer look on his face. It's like, work in progress. Like, it's just that just that's the Punisher. You know, that's the Punisher right there. You know, but also they make time for sort of the pain and the anguish, you know, and the nightmares, and the fact that he's tortured, you know, by what happened, and the fact that he couldn't, you know, protect his family. It's a really good film. I've always quite enjoyed it. And then James, again,
now we're backed up a little bit, so I don't want to make sure we kind of get back to this. So Manasan, which by the way, Manasan, I haven't seen you in a while. It's good to see you. He talks about the choice of Rosario Dawson seems interesting, but is Ahsoka supposed to be that old? And Dave, this is also something I think maybe you can comment a little bit better on than me, but I tried to figure that out one time when we were first talking about the rumors of Rosario Dawson coming to this, and I think she's about the right age. And correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't she be around her 40s for the Mandalorian, something like that?
well, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't give the whole aging process and honestly a lot of thought, because Ahsoka's race is technically not really human, so they can kind of play fast and loose with how that works anyway.
Well,
Because she
don't they establish in the Clone Wars she's like 14 or something like that
do
in the Clone Wars movie? Because I can comment on that because that's her first appearance. Right. I think she's supposed to be like 14, right? Something like that.
But you never know. It's like, you know, they may reach a certain point and kind of not appear to age as much, or I don't know. I mean, she does age through the course of the Clone Wars, but we also see her in Rebels. And when you consider her age from that point into the Mandalorian, because Mandalorian takes place after, you know, Return of the Jedi. So I would say that age is probably about right. Because I don't think they would have cast someone they didn't feel like really works. Because when you look at The Mandalorian, one of the great things they've done is they've done a really great job of casting. So I would have to say that they probably feel like that it works. Plus, with makeup and everything else, I mean, you can make someone appear to look, you know, a little bit younger than they really are anyway. But I think her age is probably about right. So, what was the next one of the comments you want to catch up on?
Well, Peggy mentions on the Clone Wars, they do such a great job of fleshing out all the characters and the world itself. And she said, sadly, I did not get to see the end. She said, might have to go back. Christensen did a great job in his last movie. So again, that's kind of the idea there that the as you've said, that the animated series has helped kind of flesh out the characters a little bit more, at least in your mind.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. They just and James actually makes a good comment too, because he was continuing to further clarify his earlier comment, and he said there's more time necessarily, but the turn to evil felt more earned, and it is because they had more time to kind of flesh that out, and that's one of the things that's really great about the Clone Wars is it definitely feels like there was a war going on, because there's a lot happening and there's a lot of battles, and you really feel, you know, the war. And because they do have all that time, everyone has a larger story and a larger role to play. I enjoyed a lot of the stuff they did actually with Obi-Wan and kind of filling in some of his backstory. And it's just all, it's, I think at the end of the day, you know, we talked about this before. It's all about how you set something up in order for the payoff to really work. You know, I feel like the prequels work fine for what they are. I quite like Revenge of the Sith. There's moments of the Phantom Menace I totally love, and there's a lot of stuff about Attack of the Clones that I quite like. But there's something to be said, and I think we're going to see this with The Mandalorian over time too, as well as any other long form storytelling, is when you have that time and you can build in those character moments. And if you're thinking about moving the story forward and you are driven by story, I think there is a lot of opportunity there to get people more invested too, because that's an important thing. The more invested someone is to something, the more they feel the payoff. The more they're along for the journey, the more the destination, whether it's a series of destinations or not, the more the destination feels like it's like, wow, I'm glad that we got to this point, or wow, I can't believe we got to this point. Because you're more invested, and there's a lot to be said for that. A lot to be said for that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right. James had a quick comment here talking about my Summit Dolph Lundgren Punisher. He says it was the late 80s, 90s Punisher. I only needed a skull on this shirt.
I agree with that.
I have always wanted to somehow take that film and digitally put a skull on his shirt and just kind of put it back out there and see how people feel about it. Because I tell you what, you put a skull on this T-shirt, I think people think of that film a lot more highly. I totally agree with that. And Peggy has another comment where she says, I try to tell people to think of the whole story as a book. And that is, again, that's a great way to look at it. Chapters in a book. It's a great way to look at it. She further clarifies saying, Phantom, Clones, Clone Wars, Sith, Solo, Rogue One, New Hope, Empire, Return, Mandalorian, Awakens, Last Jedi, and Rise. Some chapters are great and some fail or fall. That's true. But the story is still out there and possible to continue telling good stories. And I agree. There's always great potential. Just because someone doesn't choose to look at it the same way you do doesn't mean that the property of the franchise can't live on. I feel like that maybe someday, we'll get back to Stargate and someone with an amazing vision will take all that amazing world building and everything that's there and continue that storyline and move it forward, because I quite love the original Stargate film and I enjoyed the show.
I think actually one of the problems with Star Wars has been that it has, in some ways, it has tried too much to be a continuous story. When there are times when I think they just should have stopped. And there's so many other directions to go. And I think The Mandalorian is a great example of that. And because The Mandalorian is a show that's kind of fits within the broader continuity of the Star Wars world, but it's not, part of the story of the Skywalkers. It's not a story about Han Solo. You know what I mean? It's not a story about Princess Leia, even. You know what I mean? Or that branch of the family tree. It's kind of trying to be its own thing, at the same time building on the legacy of Star Wars, in particular, in this case, obviously Boba Fett, and then obviously we have Baby Yoda and other things that they're building on, but it's not about Yoda. And I think that's kind of one of the interesting things too. I think that's just off the top of my head. I think for Star Wars to go forward, I think they have to do more stories like that.
Well, it'll be interesting because when we get to the pop culture news segment of the show, I have something that kind of dovetails into that, actually. But no, yeah, I agree. I mean, to an extent. I mean, I just enjoy all this stuff and have a lot of fun with it. And I just personally feel like just because, something may not have been your cup of tea, we've seen some amazing opportunities where someone else has been able to pick up that, whatever it was that people didn't like, or pick up that property and do some truly amazing stuff with it. And I honestly, it's not that I wasn't a Dave Filoni fan, but after having watched some of the Disney Gallery Star Wars, I get why so many people are clamoring for him to be sort of like the Dave Filoni for not the Kevin Feige essentially for Star Wars. Kevin Feige is like the executive producer who helps shepherd the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, through a lot of what it's been going on. He's kind of the man with the plan or the vision, and helps the films to execute and kind of fall in line. in terms of their large interconnected universe. And a lot of people have been saying that Dave Filoni would be someone who'd be really great to help do that for Star Wars. And I'd have to say, having listened to him talk, I think he'd be a great person for that. But I also think Jon Favreau, he's done an amazing job too. So I'd be curious to see, how things continue to follow along. I'm just very excited that we have The Mandalorian, because it's been the Star Wars thing I've enjoyed the most of the new stuff. I didn't hate all the new movies, but I didn't particularly care for Last Jedi. I think that's well on record. But I'm just glad that we have Mandalorian, because at least it's something fun with Star Wars. So there you go.
Man of Sand brings up an interesting larger point, which is will the new age of big budget series offered under streaming then take over Star Wars, leaving movies on the margins? And that's a great question, Man of Sand, because that's what the industry is asking itself right now, not just about Star Wars, but about everything. Because that's one of the reasons that we always do our dedicated Streaming Wars coverage, because potentially it is such a game changer in terms of the way that we see content. Obviously, with right now, with the global pandemic, people have talked about, is this the golden age of streaming, or is this going to lead to the golden age of streaming? Is this sort of the push that it needed, because that's the direction it was sort of going to begin with? It's a great open-ended question. I don't have an answer for it, but it's a great question, and it's one that I think we constantly ask on this show and are constantly trying to figure out the answer to that question.
And when we get to our Streaming Wars segment, I think there's something that again goes directly into that dovetails into that. But beyond that too, actually looks at it from, sort of the flip side. Because Man of Sand is saying, will the new age of big budget series offered under streaming then take over Star Wars, leaving movies to the margins? But then we have something we're going to be talking about here in a little bit, where maybe not necessarily, it's actually the flip. It's a huge big budget movie that they're hoping will help to cement and kind of bring a streaming service into prominence. And it's interesting because a lot of the coverage I've seen, they reference this particular property as if it will do for this new streaming service what The Mandalorian has done for Disney Plus. So it's curious to see how everyone's approaching it and how everyone's handling all these things very different. But like Eric said, it is definitely the question that Hollywood is asking itself right now. And it'd be curious to see what that answer, becomes as we continue to move forward and, things become, more readily apparent in terms of like what people want to watch, what people want to support, and how people want to continue to enjoy these various properties and franchises that they've always loved, where they would prefer to see it as a streaming series or they prefer to see it as a film. I think that at the end of the day will be what wins out, what people are most interested and willing to pay for and support. So cool.
Hey, Jerry Ball says hi to you, Dave.
Hello. Are we good to move on to pop culture news, or?
Yeah, I think
we're good.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. Let me pull the graphic up here real quick. Okay, so we're going to segue into pop culture news. On the pop culture news segment, Eric and I talk about the things that are interesting or happening in the world of pop culture news, things that we find interesting, things that we find noteworthy. Sometimes they're fun, sometimes they're unfortunate, sometimes they're sad. Unfortunately, for the first news item for this episode, we want to go ahead and acknowledge this particular item, which unfortunately is sad. So character actor Richard Hurd, known for Star Trek and V, has died at the age of 87. He's a very familiar, well-known character actor. He actually just recently passed away. Just real quickly here, Richard Hurd, the veteran character known for his work on Seinfeld and recognizable to genre fans for appearances in the V and Star Trek franchises, died Thursday at the age of 87 at his home in Los Angeles. Hurd's wife, actress Patricia Crowder, informed The Hollywood Reporter of her husband's death, which was due to cancer-related causes. Hurd was never a household name, but over the course of nearly 5 decades of screen acting, he became a recognizable face, bringing his commanding presence and versatile talents to dozens of film and TV credits, including classic films and legendary sci-fi franchises. So we want to extend our condolences, obviously, to Richard Hurd's widow and family in this moment, and just wanted to acknowledge his passing. I am very familiar with him from Star Trek, but I think somewhat almost more so from V. What about you, Eric? What do you remember Richard Hurd for probably the most?
Oh, it's got to be V. There's no doubt it's V. V was huge for me when I was growing up. I watched that first run when it came on, when it was on broadcast television. I remember what an event the original miniseries was, and then also the subsequent Final Battle miniseries, which as a kid, I just was bonkers over Final Battle. As an adult, I really appreciate the original miniseries quite a bit, and I have all of them. I even have the live action series that, thankfully for him, his character had already been killed off, so he was not in the actual series. But it was shocking. I still remember when they shot him in the V miniseries when he died. That was shocking because he was supposed to be the leader. He was supposed to be in charge of the visitors. But I'll always remember him for that. I am familiar with Voyager. I've seen the episodes that he's on. I know that he's Tom Paris's father, Admiral Paris, and so for a lot of Trekkies, he's iconic because of that. But quite frankly, Voyager has never been my most favorite Star Trek. But I love V. I absolutely loved V, and I'll always remember him for that. And I know he was involved with a lot of other projects. He was one of those guys that was, he guest starred in all sorts of different shows and movies and things like that over his long career. So, he did far more than that. He was a very prolific working actor.
Yeah, very cool. So just a couple quick comments here from the Rogues Gallery.
Peggy remembered something. Yeah, Quantum Leap. He was on an episode of Quantum Leap, a really good one too, where he played a sort of like Captain Video type guy that was actually implied to have been the person who invented the quantum leap theory. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Peggy. I forgot about, because that's a great episode. It's actually, because he's like this sort of Captain Video type guy. And he actually it's implied that he was the one that came up with the whole theory of the quantum leap project that, Sam Beckett, his character, came up with. That's a good call there. That's a good one.
She also mentions that he was also on Sequest.
That one I didn't remember. I didn't remember he was on Sequest. I saw Sequest, but I don't remember that one.
And then James says, I'll censor it a little bit. Forget cancer. I agree with James. Forget cancer. I've known so many people that have been affected by cancer. I like to think one day we will find something that's a little bit more. I don't know. I just keep pushing towards that cure. You know what I mean? And Amanda Sand says that he remembers the iconic scene where Richard Hur's character John is unmasked by the resistance on live TV in front of shocked onlookers.
Iconic. Absolutely iconic. It gives me chills. I remember that scene. So well.
Yep. And then Peggy says Future Boy. And then James Stones chimes in again saying, Sam told young Sam, chicken first egg or egg paradox. I'm a little lost on that.
That's from the Quantum Leap episode, because what happens is Sam is Bakula's character, right, in Quantum Leap. Yeah. So little Sam actually calls into the show, and that's when he explains his theory on time travel. And then Sam realizes he got the idea from watching this guy on television. Okay. It's a really neat moment. And like you said, it's chicken or the egg, because obviously Sam, it's like a time paradox, right? Because Sam is there, as he's from the future and he's a time traveler and he's helping, Richard Hurd's character. but at the same time, Richard Hurd's character is actually interacting with Sam as a child. So that's the whole chicken or the egg thing, like which came first, right? So
Right.
it's a total time paradox thing that can make you go cross-eyed if you think about it too much. But it's a really neat moment. It's a really neat moment.
And then Peggy says that apparently Future Boy was his character's name on Quantum Leap. And I would apologize to everyone. I love Quantum Leap. I actually own the entire series on DVD. And I think my wife and I have made our way through it at least 2 times I know of. But there's just certain things that sometimes don't stick with me sometimes. I remember him being in the show, but I don't remember that much of the specifics, unfortunately. So, I
want to remind people, I'm a big advocate of Comet, and Comet currently has Quantum Leap in rotation. And I think they do 2 episodes every weeknight. So if anybody's interested in that. And Comet is also available through Stir and also through their own website for free streaming. So if you prefer to get it that way, I watch it on my antenna. I'm one of those guys. I actually have an antenna. But Quantum Leap is actually in rotation on that network right now.
And one of the things that I quite enjoyed, actually, that was happening around the time towards the end of the Quantum Leap run on television, is that Innovation, which was a comic book company at the time, actually published a Quantum Leap comic book series that I quite enjoyed, that I used to read as well. So there's some other interesting Quantum Leap type stuff, which is kind of fun. That if you're into Quantum Leap, might be able to searching out and exploring and reading more. The cover art from was particularly good. I think it'd be something that'd be fun to actually talk about at some point. Maybe in the Retro Rogues fanzine actually be a good place for it. So, but very cool. And like I said, we just wanted to acknowledge the passing of Richard Hurd. Just a great character actor who's done all kinds of amazing work. And it's interesting because when I was looking for a biography of his to bring up on the show, I picked this one because it also mentioned V as well as Star Trek. And ironically, I haven't seen many of them actually mention Quantum Leap. That's one of those curious things.
Because I forgot about that episode. And I'm serious, that is a great episode. That's a really good episode, the one that he's in. It's a good one.
Yes, and then James...
and Peggy would just clarify that that's the name of the episode. Future Boy.
Okay, Future Boy, okay.
So Quantum Leap episode is called Future Boy, and he was in the finale. That's right. He was in the finale as well. I forgot about that. Yeah. Holy cow, you got some good calls here, Peggy. Yeah, I forgot he's in the finale, which James Stone says is the saddest ending in TV history. It is pretty sad, James. I know there's actually some fans that hate the Quantum Leap ending, which I rather liked it myself, but I know there's a lot of fans that despise it. But I forgot. Yeah, John Hurd is in that. Richard Hurd, I'm sorry. Richard Hurd is in that.
That is something I will never forget, is that black screen and those white letters came up and it said Sam Beckett never returned home. And I'm like, what? It's like, what? What do you mean he never returned home? What are you saying? I guess we should have said spoiler alert. Oh my Lord. Yes.
I think we need a 5 second. I think we need a 5 second delay to put you on, Dave. And I need a button. Okay. And I'll just put like a big alert thing. You know what I mean?
Sorry.
There's Dave going again. Spoiler alert.
But no, again, we just wanted to mention and kind of mark his passing and talk a little bit about his career and celebrate all the amazing roles that he's actually played, and such an important genre actor when you consider about these influential shows where you're talking about Star Trek, you're talking about V, or you're talking about Quantum Leap. So do you want to go to our next pop culture story, Eric?
Yes. Let's see. I've got a couple here, so let me decide which one I want to lead off with here. Well, this is related to our other main topic today. So, I've got several that are. So I'm going to start out with this one, though, because I've got some controversy. It's always nice to have some controversy on the show. They say it gets you ratings, so we'll see if that's true or not. So this is a Hollywood Reporter article. And it says Back to the Future writer asks Universal to destroy censored version of the sequel. So Bob Gale says neither he nor director Robert Zemeckis knew the Netflix stream version existed. Says Bob Gale is asking fans not to be too hard on Netflix for a censored version of Back to the Future Part 2, which was streamed for a short while. Fans of the series were irate when they discovered a tiny portion of the 1989 sequel was changed poorly. It has since been replaced with the standard version. Now, Dave, did you know about this? Because we reviewed this movie and we reviewed the Netflix version of this movie just last week. And had you caught this error in the movie? Were you aware of this?
It's weird because I felt like there was something that wasn't quite right, but I couldn't really put my finger on it. And what's actually censored in it, you could miss pretty easily. I'll be honest with you, it's one of those things that to me it didn't terribly affect the storytelling, and I'm not such a I love the Back to the Future movies. I own them, and I've watched them quite a bit. But I have watched the first one the most, and I have watched Part 3, the one we're talking about tonight. I have watched that one the most. The one that's in the middle, I like the one that takes place in sort of the dark, twisted 80s. But it's not one that I have revisited a lot over the years. The two that I have always watched the most has been Part 3, which I think is just a great, time travel, steampunk, like adventure movie. It's a great Back to the Future movie, but it's just a great movie, period. But we're going to get to that soon enough. But the original one, the first one, is the one I have watched the most. I think I would have more likely caught something from the first one than from Part 2, because my understanding is that it was Part 2 is the one that has the censored moment in it, because apparently it involves the magazine, because they actually have cut out something or changed something with the Ooh La La magazine, if I remember correctly. And I'll be honest with you, it didn't really. I didn't really catch it, and I was fully paying attention. But also, too, as just previously discussed, when they mentioned it, I was like, oh, yeah, Richard Hurd was in Quantum Leap. But I don't remember all the specific details about that episode. So
apparently, and this is a quote from Bob Gale, it says, apparently this was a foreign version, which neither directed Robert Zemeckis nor he even knew existed. For some country that had a problem with the Ooh La La magazine cover. that was the scene that was edited. He said, yeah, I asked that the studio destroy this version. FYI, Netflix does not edit films. They only run the versions that are supplied to them. So they're blameless. If you can direct your ire at Universal, but I think they will be a lot more careful in the future and with the future. So I just wanted to mention this because neither of us caught this error, but a lot of fans did. And, the writer has come back and said this version actually should be destroyed. This is a foreign version of the film that they did not approve, and he wants it axed, and it's not Netflix's fault. It's Universal's fault.
And I'll bring this up. Certain countries, they have certain sort of their quote unquote decency standards. That for a lot of things. And I know that, for example, when Lynn Workman and I were self-publishing Bushi Tales. Now, Bushi is just another term for samurai. When we were doing Bushi Tales, it involves the main characters are 4 female samurai and are sent on a quest by Hachiman, the Japanese god of war. I was sending out packages because when we initially were selling the series and making it available for people, we had a lot of servicemen and women overseas purchasing these books, which was really great because we had some really great coverage in Stars and Stripes, which is the military's newspaper. And so I was very excited about it. But I had a couple destinations. I was having a heck of a time actually getting packages to people, and they would never arrive. And then it turned out the reason is because Akio, which is our main character, which if you see her from Bushi Tales, she's fully clothed. She's not showing any skin, but her hair isn't covered. And apparently, because she was on this envelope and because of the countries we were sending these packages to, they were basically being screened and destroyed before they even got to who they were supposed to get to. And so I learned that even though I didn't consider, Bushy Tails, quote unquote porn, or like Playboy or anything, for certain cultures and certain religious beliefs, I guess it is. So we just would put it in a basic mailer with no extra stuff on it, because we were putting a decal of Akio on there, because I always like to do extra stuff, and I was like, well, if we don't do that, perhaps it'll get through. And then the packages started getting through. So you never know what certain people will unfortunately find offense with. But I respect all the different cultures and religious beliefs, so I don't want to seem cold-hearted about it. But I've experienced my own weird form of that, where certain people objected to certain things that I didn't think were necessarily indecent. So, but everyone's perspective is unique to themselves. So.
Well, I always believe in allowing the creator the maximum amount of freedom possible, and so I'm anti-censorship. So I'm just glad that they're getting their version back as it should be on Netflix. And I apologize that I myself did not note the error.
Well, I didn't note it, but that's just because for me it's not something I was focused on, and I didn't even catch it, to be honest with you. I'm not tuning in to Back to the Future for some kind of a salacious, whatever it supposedly, was. I don't know. So I think that's why I didn't catch it. It's not something that I specifically was looking for. And like I said, Back to the Future Part 2, that's the one I've watched the least. I would have been more likely to miss something probably from Part 3 or Part 1. So.
Well, Peggy mentions that it's good to know that Netflix doesn't edit, because I think there's a lot of people that wonder about that. He says, I know that PBS does for shows, so that's interesting. And actually, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, Peggy, because I actually recall being quite young and seeing some rather racy things on PBS because it wasn't edited. So it's kind of, I'm curious if that's changed, because I'm not a huge PBS guy now, although I do enjoy programs from time to time on PBS. In fact, I actually watch, what is it? It's the one about Queen Victoria. I think it might just be called The Queen. I've watched that a couple times on PBS. And I used to watch Doctor Who on PBS when I was very young. That's actually where all my Doctor Who knowledge comes from, is from watching it on PBS. But that's interesting to know if they actually do censor some of their programming, possibly kind of like what you were saying, Dave, reversed, where things over there would be considered acceptable for television, but they're not considered acceptable perhaps here in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's just you never know. Different cultures have different touch points that and because of their various religious beliefs, where they might take offense to something that we here wouldn't think would be a big deal. So I totally understand that, and
we actually got a good discussion about this going here in the Rogues Gallery. Amanda San says, now that CG post editing has become so easy, it seems like these little edits are becoming more and more frequent as filmmakers or distributors try to cater to more markets and their constraints. And I think that's absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head there, Amanda San. That's absolutely, with digital editing, it makes it much easier to do these kinds of things and to do these little switcheroos, and people don't notice. Like I said, we didn't notice, and I consider myself and I consider Dave pretty good observers, and we're pretty big fans of pop culture, and we've been involved with the creative process and all that stuff, and so it's easy for that stuff to kind of be missed, So I think that you're right. I think that in this, as you said, the CG post editing world, it is becoming easier and easier to do that. Although it sounds like in this particular situation, this was a rather old edit. For some, God knows who, for God knows where, that kind of thing. And it just happens to be the version that Universal gave Netflix.
Well, and it's interesting because all I could think of is that Universal was thinking, let's give them the most easily accessible, version, that they consider the most, would have the most appeal to a broader audience, to avoid any kind of even remote controversy, I would assume. But no, yeah, I don't. It's interesting. And then Peggy brings up a comment, and I guess she's touching on what I was talking about earlier about the distribution problems I was having with sending Bushy Tales out. And she says, and you did the research and found out what was happening. Well, I had to. It was costing me money. I guess the directors didn't think to look into distribution issues. And, when you're a Hollywood director, I would think to an extent you probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about distribution issues. When you're an independent publisher, you think about everything because, if a product isn't getting to someone and you're constantly having to put it back in the mail, it's costing you money. And a lot of times, independent comic books specifically, there's not a lot of profit there to begin with. So I needed to find out what was wrong. And I also wanted to make sure that those people that wanted to get those stories, that wanted to read them, I want to make sure they get them, I want to make sure they're entertained. That as a comic storyteller, that's my job, is hopefully to entertain you, lift you out of your experiences or what you have going on, transport you to another amazing, magical place and have a totally different experience and hopefully want to come back for more. That's my job. So if you're not getting the book, I can't even begin to transport you, So no, yeah, it was a weird thing. I had no idea. And it made me a little bit more sensitive to some of the things that we were doing. And we did make some interesting, different creative choices moving forward with different things when we realized that it was a problem. Because like I said, it was primarily affecting those servicemen and women overseas who were wanting to actually receive Bushy Tales. And luckily enough, there was quite a few of them. We were very blessed in that sense. Bobby Chambers says, do you think this is something we will start to see more often, especially with older films? And I'm assuming we're talking about censorship. Well, there's a lot of talk about that. The people are curious about what's going to happen with Disney Plus. When Disney Plus rolled out, there's a lot of films people consider to be have moments or characters or scenes that they consider racially insensitive, for example. People are curious to see if they're going to take those moments out, just edit them right out, if they're going to try and change something, put something in place of it. And then at the end of the day, for most of the films, what Disney did is they just put out a warning, a disclaimer at the front that just tried to help people to have a cultural perspective, for when the film came out. Along these lines, talking about that, I'll never quite forget the first time that I watched the Batman movie serials, the ones that came out in the 40s, because it is very anti-Japanese. It's so weird because there's a radio drama that actually talks about what's happening in the war. And, feelings were very, very harsh at that point in time. And I remembered it started a conversation with me and my mom about, why is it like this? Because I couldn't understand at that young age, exactly what I was seeing. And my mom had to explain to me what had happened. And what that does is that tells me is that sometimes maybe we don't need to censor things. Maybe we just need to use it as an opportunity to explain to people and teach them about something that happened in the past. Perhaps we can learn from those moments in time, and maybe grow and become hopefully a better, more well-rounded person because of it. Because I didn't realize until my mom was talking about it, everything that had been going on, with the relocation camps and everything. And I didn't realize any of that had gone on. But the way I learned about it was not in history class in school. It was actually because of a conversation I had with my mom because of the Batman movie serials. So just because something is offensive, just because something is unfortunate, just because something is a product of its time, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily evil nor wrong. It depends, as with all things, the context that you give it. And, if you can use it as an opportunity to teach and educate, and help people learn from a moment in time, learn from a mistake, hopefully, and make better choices. I think there's something to be said for that as well.
There's absolutely something to be said for that as well. I mean, that's the entire point, to me, because, it's subjective to say whether that particular serial is a good story or not, but it's objective to say it is a product of its times and reflects its times. That's an objective statement. You know what I mean? As opposed to a subjective statement as, is it any good? You know what I mean?
Well,
There's a difference there. There's a huge difference between that. But
yeah.
there is another side to this that's a little bit more benign that Peggy brings up, because we're talking about PBS specifically, and she says, I don't think PBS edits it for censor issues, but for time or something like that. And so scenes for their mysteries like Sherlock are missing, and that's a possibility as well. That the time sometimes, especially when you talk about international markets, sometimes the allotment for a particular show is different than it is here. So, for instance, in some jurisdictions, they don't have commercials. So the amount of time that they have something on is different. Now, PBS doesn't have that problem because PBS doesn't have commercials either. But things like that do happen where programming is edited simply because of timing issues, for time issues. It has nothing to do with actual censorship. And that's a good point. In fact, what's interesting to me is there's a number of interesting television edits of classic movies like Dune, Aliens, that I would argue the television version is better than the theatrical version because they actually added scenes because they had more time to fill, where it actually went in the opposite direction. So that does happen. It happens both ways. Things get cut, but sometimes they'll even add things for a television broadcast, especially in different markets and things like that. So that's also kind of interesting. That happens sometimes too. And James helped me, by the way. Victoria is the show I was talking about. The Queen is on Netflix. Victoria is the one that's on PBS. Thank you for helping me with that, because actually I think Victoria is a really good show. I've never watched The Queen on Netflix, so I don't really want to promote something that I've never watched, but Victoria on PBS, I actually do enjoy quite a bit.
Well, I can chime in on The Queen on Netflix and say that my wife and I thoroughly enjoyed it and highly recommend it, especially for those of you who like things like Downton Abbey or sort of British drama. I found it to be interesting. And we found ourselves fact-checking a lot. And that's the thing that's also interesting. We found ourselves fact-checking what was going on. Did that really happen? Was that really like that? And what's interesting about it is it ends up being a history lesson for us because, we don't know that much about what's happening in the British Empire. And we're pulling up going, what do you know? What do you know about that? What do you know? So, again, another teaching moment within television, depending upon how you look at it.
Well, James mentions that Batman was a tad racist in those serials, and by a tad, I mean a lot.
Yes. And that was what I was trying to make, because I was telling my mom, I was like, what in the heck is going on? But it was also one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life, too, because that is the most, and not just racially insensitive, just humanly insensitive Batman I've ever seen in my life, too. One of my favorite moments in that is Batman is fighting these, they're like sort of like zombies, like radium, like mentally controlled zombie things or something. And Batman's tussling with one of them. They're super strong. And he pitches this Batman over the side, and Batman is falling to his death. That's how the cliffhanger ends. It's like, oh, is Batman going to live? And then the next chapter, it starts up. Batman's still falling with that back screen projection, I might add. He's still falling. And when he lands, he actually lands on a window washing, the little carriage things, the little things that go up and down on the windows. And he lands on it. And it's hilarious because he knocks both of those dudes on there off. They fall to their death. Batman does nothing for them, just climbs right back up to keep fighting those dudes on the roof. He couldn't care less about those two guys that fell to their death. So Batman was just humanly insensitive. And to weigh in on what you said earlier, Eric, it's like, whether it's not necessarily good, it was a bad story. The whole thing is just as an interesting moment in time as the first adaptation of Batman. It's a curiosity, but it's not very good. Stretch the imagination. But it's
well, Peggy makes the bigger point, like I was talking about. She says, yes, Dave, use it as an opportunity to teach, which is what is so sad about this new world where we tell people they have to be politically correct, but not why. And that's a great insight, Peggy, because to me, being politically correct in a lot of ways is just about having good manners, but it's not spun that way. You know what I mean? And that's why you have to have the conversation, and you can't just sort of just jump to conclusions. That's the whole idea. That's why it's important to have these more meaningful conversations and not just sort of say whatever your little gut reaction is. Mana Sam says perhaps That's one reason why some fans value physical media copies of favorites, because they're unalterable and preserve what was already created. And man, Sam, there's tons of fans that believe that. There's a whole movement of fandom that prefers physical media over digital, and they make all sorts of points about that's why digital is always going to have problems because of the thing that we're talking about here. Because you're not going to ever have these definitive versions of the films anymore. I mean, a great example. I mean, we've been talking a lot about Star Wars. I mean, you think about like the special editions, and things like that, and that was done with the blessing and direction of the creator of the property, and he's massively changed the films. You know what I mean? Not to the point that I think the meaning of the films are changed, but very well in some scenes they're substantial. They actually do change the motivation of the characters. So, yeah, that is a great argument for why a lot of people like and prefer physical media.
And then Peggy chimes in and says the first time that I saw Highlander was the whole director's cut, and then was upset when I saw the theatrical release. Well, that's the thing. It's like sometimes these films can change quite a bit, especially with editing. And I mentioned to Eric earlier, I said talking about director's cuts and whatever, which we'll be mentioning hopefully something here in a little bit in the pop culture news segment of the Streaming Wars talking about this. But it's amazing how much something can be changed, and not just the intent, but the whole thing. Yes, Han shot first. James.
That's the scene I'm talking about, James. Totally changes the motivation of the character and totally changes the character. That's a problem. That is a problem. I don't care that he created it. He changed we could do a whole segment just on that. Just on that. But Chris Roberts, who we haven't heard much from tonight, he raised his hand. Physical media is far better. And Chris, I am a physical media guy as well. Although I've mentioned many times in this program, my collection really is not that substantial. I'm very selective in what I actually acquire, but I do prefer physical media over digital, personally.
And James Stone brings up yet another important, timely comment in reference to the Batman original movie serials. He says, wasn't that Robin like 30 years old, 38 years old? He probably was, James. He probably was. Robin is a great character in the comics and such a great character for animation. But when you start trying to take Robin and bring him into the real world, as much as I love Batman Forever, it gets problematic. It just does. So there you go. But yeah, he probably was 38 years old. He looked like he was 38 years old. So yeah, again, not championing that movie serial at all. Just saying, not championing. You want to watch a great movie serial? I would recommend the Captain Marvel one. The Captain Marvel one is great. Or I would even recommend Zorro's Fighting Legion. Zorro's Fighting Legion is wonderful. Could highly, highly recommend that, especially for those of you who love Zorro. And I love Zorro. So Zorro's Fighting Legion is great. The Captain Marvel one gets a very big thumbs up from me. Even that crazy Captain America one with that opening scene with that guy on that motorcycle. I'm sure somebody died filming it. Even that one's kind of slightly entertaining. The Batman one, I don't know. Jury's out. So very cool. Are we ready to move on to our next pop culture story?
Did you have a story queued up there?
I do. I have one queued up. We were talking about this earlier, talking about all the different delays and all the crazy things that are happening, and talking about continuing to pick up stories and continue to move them forward. This is actually from Polygon, and this story was from May 26th. It basically starts off with, it says, the next phase of Star Wars universe delayed into 2021. This story is by Charlie Hall, and it says Star Wars, the High Republic event takes place 200 years before The Phantom Menace. This was the series they talked about. There were going to be a series of novels and comics. Read just a little bit of this just briefly. It says the Star Wars, the High Republic, the ambitious cross-media collection of books and comics have been delayed into 2021. The announcement came Tuesday at the official Star Wars website, and I heard it was without a lot of fanfare. The High Republic is a new setting in the Star Wars universe. It takes place 200 years before the events of Star Wars The Phantom Menace. The media onslaught will now begin on January 5th, 2021, with Charles Soule's adult novel, Star Wars The High Republic Light of the Jedi, and Justina Ireland's middle grade novel, Star Wars The High Republic A Test of Courage. Then comes the young adult novel by Claudia Gray titled Star Wars The High Republic Into the Dark on February 2nd, 2021. Release dates for the comics, Marvel's Star Wars The High Republic and IDW's Star Wars The High Republic Adventures, will be announced sometime in the future. You know, the biggest thing actually coming out of this article that I really want to talk about, that I'm not prepared to really talk about, is what in the heck is the deal with IDW and Marvel partnering the way that they have? You know, it was breaking news a little while ago when they announced that IDW is going to be basically publishing a line of Spider-Man comic books, essentially a more all-reader accessible Spider-Man comic book series. And that's the biggest thing I'm finding out of this article right now. That's what I really want to talk about, but at the same point, that's not the point of it. But what is the deal with Marvel partnering with IDW in this way? Maybe for another time.
Well, I can tell you what the rumor is, Dave. I can't back it up with any official sources, but I can tell you what the rumor is, and you've probably heard it.
I'm curious what the rumor is, because I'm going to be honest with you. I don't understand. I mean, I've heard that the whole licensing idea, that eventually they just might get into the licensing business and they won't really worry with publishing new comics. We've kind of talked about that, I think, sort of soft touch that topic before.
We've touched on it before when we've talked about the state of the comic book industry and things like that. And that's absolutely what the rumor is. The rumor is that this is basically a soft push. They're testing the waters so they can get up, so Disney can get out of publishing. They don't want to publish anymore. They never have. But Disney has always licensed their products when it comes to comics and books and things like that. They've never been a big fan of publishing. Even if you go back to the Uncle Scrooge comics and things like that are much beloved and have all sorts of, a huge following and everything like that, Disney didn't publish them. They licensed them out to other properties and things like that. So that's their MO. And a lot of people think they want to close down Marvel Comics completely and just license the characters out. And then all the new stuff's going to come out of the studios. That's what the rumor is. And this is the soft way for them to do it with the Adventures line, which for anybody who doesn't know that, the Adventures line is geared towards children, which is, of course, the future of this media. You know what I mean? Is always going to be kids. But that's the rumor out there. How true it is, I don't know, but definitely from the way that Disney operates, you could definitely see it. Like I said, I can go all the way back to Scrooge McDuck and tell you that's how Disney operates. They don't want to be in the comics business. Never have.
Right. I can see that. And then Peggy, touching on the main topic here about the fact that the Star Wars The High Republic has basically been delayed. She says it didn't get fanfare because I think everyone just expected it. And I'd say yes. In all honesty, I thought they were further along in production and development of a lot of these, and it wouldn't necessarily be that heavily affected. I understand on the comics side because there's so much art production that has to happen, and it passes between so many hands depending upon the studios, the various freelance professionals that you involve in such a production. But on the novel side, I would just assume it's the writer, the editor. Of course, they've got to run it through the stories group. I would have thought it would have, been more close to roll out. Maybe there's just elements of it that aren't ready, so they've decided to sit on the whole thing. But I just thought it dovetailed very well into the previous segment, because we were talking about the idea of picking something up. Just because some people don't like something, it doesn't mean you can't add something interesting to it and usher in a whole new era. Because I feel like The Mandalorian is an opportunity for them to do that. I guess time will tell, and we'll find out in 2021 whether or not Star Wars: The High Republic will also be that for Star Wars as a more I don't know how to state this. We'll have to see if it helps do for Star Wars overall what I think The Mandalorian has started to do, and help kind of within certain fans' eyes, bring it, kind of back. I was actually kind of curious about this line. It's been a little while since I've been really into the Star Wars novels and stuff. And I was curious to maybe give some of this a try and see what I thought of it. Although I'll be honest with you, I keep wanting to go back through, if they weren't so expensive, and actually pick up some of Richard Hatch's Battlestar Galactica novels that I had missed when they were originally first coming out. I've been reading a lot of them, like Warhawk and Rebellion, and find the ones I was missing and actually go back and actually just get more immersed into the classic Battlestar Galactica world myself.
The biggest problem I have with this thing with the High Republic is I feel like it's a clear example of them taking something that's clearly based on the EU, the Knights of the Old Republic, and then pretending like they came up with a new idea. That's my take on it. I think that's what this is. I think it's them trying to market it so they don't have to deal with the Knights of the Old Republic continuity. And the funny thing is, I don't really have a dog in that fight because I've never been a big EU guy. The only EU thing I got into was the Thrawn series of books, and that was because of my brother, because he owned them. So I happened to read them and thought they were excellent. The whole Timothy Zahn story I thought was an amazing story arc. I wish that had been Disney Wars. I really do. I really wish that had been Disney Wars adaptation of the Thrawn trilogy. That I think that would have been awesome. But I'm not a big EU guy, and I've said this before. I've said it many times, folks. When it comes to the directors, the writers, the producers, and that includes the Filonis and the Dave Favres, who I have great respect for, they could care less about this stuff. They don't care about the books. Never have, never will. So it all gets trashed. That's my problem with it,
Yeah, you can see that there's sometimes not a lot of respect for quote unquote the source material. But every once in a while, someone does a really amazing job respecting the source material. And I prefer, in all honesty, experiencing a lot of these stories, the side stories and the expansion of the universe. I usually enjoy those more in comics and novels, to be honest. So, well, I'd be curious to check this out and see if it's any good. So, but like I said, I also find myself like going, man, I should just run down Richard Hatch's Battlestar Galactica novels.
That would be good. That would be good.
So we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. So, because some of them are actually quite pricey because they didn't have very huge print runs, and getting a hold of some of them is a expensive prospect. And I was even considering too, even going even further back, because they used to take a lot of the teleplays for the shows and then work them up as novels. They'd actually been releasing those too. And I didn't even realize those even existed. And primarily those were paperbacks. And I was like, oh, that'd be cool to try and, run down some of those. So we'll see. We'll see.
Well, Man of Sand brings up the point. It said it almost feels like the Disney Star Wars people are imitating the proposed follow-ups to Game of Thrones, which are about exploring the ancient universe. In other words, they're prequels, they're not sequels. But the funny thing is, I think they're just as stalled as this project is. I don't think they're going anywhere either, especially if you're talking about the live action stuff. I know that there's been books, that are set, prior to the era of Game of Thrones. But of course, Game of Thrones itself, what's the official title? Song of Fire and Ice. That's still not finished. The book is still not finished. The show's finished. The Game of Thrones television show's finished, but the show actually went past the novels. So George R. R. Martin still has another novel to write as an actual sequel, but there are several prequel novels, and that was what HBO was talking about doing, was adapting some of those and doing some, prequel stories. And so, yeah, I think that there's some, obviously there's some ideas there that, I think it goes one way or the other, right? When you want to get rid of continuity, you either have to go way, 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 way back, or you go way, way, way in the future. And that's, I think, just something that all these different showrunners, producers, executives out there, they all have an interest in that because they're too lazy to actually, be devoted to the source material, to the original, and they don't like canon. I say it all the time. Continuity is the enemy of lazy writers. So put it way in the past or put it way in the future, and then you have to deal with any of that stuff.
Well, it'd be interesting to see what they do with it because, and we'll see which approach works. With this, they're going to dial it back. And then we previously discussed Star Trek Discovery, where they're trying to push it forward. They're going into the far-flung future, to get away from some of this stuff, and then they're going to try and go back. So I don't know. We'll have to see. Let's see. And then Peggy's got a comment where she says, it should have been Return of the Jedi, then into Zahn's Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and Last Command. I think a lot of fans would have liked that, Peggy. A lot of fans would like that. And she says that would have made her so happy. A lot of fans very happy.
There were a lot of fans that would have supported you on that, Peggy. There's a lot of fans that would have supported you. And I don't even know all that material. I didn't really get into Dark Force Rising. Well, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say I didn't get into Dark Force Rising. I read the books. Okay, but I'm just saying that, in terms of the EU in general, that was the only stuff that I really got into. I don't have any other stuff to judge it on, because there were lots of other books, besides the Zahn trilogy. That there were plenty of other EU books that other fans would love to have seen adapted, but that didn't happen. So,
and as we've mentioned on the show previously, there's a lot of things in the Disney Star Wars films that I think had a lot more potential. They just didn't really explore it very much. Like in the last film, The Rise of Skywalker, I like the idea of the Sith Zealots. Like, I think there's something really interesting there. And I like the idea of the Knights of Ren. And if they did kind of set those characters up and kind of carried them through the 3 movies and actually explored a lot of that and led up to the events in Rise of Skywalker, I think I would have enjoyed it more. Because I think there's something really interesting with all those concepts and ideas. It's just they're just kind of stuck in or shoehorned in a weird place. And James Stowe made the comment earlier talking about Clone Wars and talked about how he felt like that with Anakin, one of the things he thought was really great is his turn to evil felt more earned because they had more time. Well, it's the same thing. Those ideas, those concepts to me, I find very interesting, and I wish they would have spent more time exploring them. And one of the things that's really nice about books and comics and such is it gives you the opportunity to explore those kind of ideas and kind of do more world building and flesh out concepts and develop them a little bit further. So, I guess we'll just see. I keep coming back to that. We'll have to see how this works out. I don't know. I feel like the name's a bit problematic though. Star Wars: The High Republic. It's like when we were working through these titles. Star Wars: High Republic, Light of the Jedi. Star Wars: High Republic, A Test of Courage. Star Wars: The High Republic, Into the Dark. It's just like, wow, it's a lot of words. It's a lot of words. From a marketing standpoint, I'm thinking, that's a lot of words. So, there you go. But we'll see. Yeah. Do you have anything else for pop culture, Eric? Or do you think we're ready to move maybe to streaming wars?
I've got one, because I thought this would be kind of neat just to talk about briefly, because we've been trying to we deliberately been trying to talk about more video game stuff. And so I thought this would be something good to talk about, since both you and I were a fan of the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. So there is a video game out now called the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance Tactics. And this is a review from Turn-Based Lovers. And it says, Dark Crystal Age of Tactics is a video game based on the Netflix TV show The Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, a prequel for the popular culture movie The Dark Crystal, created by Jim Henson and Frank Oz. And here's an image of the gameplay. You can kind of see, it looks like maybe the Chamberlain over there being involved in a little fight with the Gelflings. It says, so your objective is to defeat the Skeksis by uniting the Gelfling clans throughout Thra, and you accomplish this by winning battles and recruiting other Gelflings as you advance into the game. Now, one thing I want to say right off the bat, because I have done a little bit of research on this game prior to this, and one thing I'm a little disappointed at is that you can't play as the Skeksis, because I like to be the bad guy. And actually, this is called Retro Rogue, so I think it's always kind of fun to be the bad guy. I'm just partial that way sometimes. But you do play as the Gelflings, and this is like a turn-based strategy game. So if you like those kind of games and you like the Dark Crystal, even if you didn't necessarily see the Age of Resistance, this might be a fun game for you. This particular review, I'll get right to the end for you, so you know what their take on it was. They gave it a 7 out of 10, and they said the game is fantastic if you like the show and you like tactics games. The bad, it becomes a bit repetitive. It doesn't seem to be rewarding enough for random battles. So I just thought I'd throw it out there. I don't know if you'd even heard about this, Dave.
I hadn't heard about it, but again, I as I stated previously on the show, I tend to try and stay away from a lot of gaming stuff just because I find that when I get wrapped up in video games, I don't get anything else done. And then I famously in interviews talked before about the idea that, one person talked to me once and they said, you're going to have to pick what's more important to you. And so I decided being productive is, maybe more valuable. So I kind of gave up gaming for a little while. Although that Mortal Kombat 11 game is calling my name with RoboCop. That's what's going to probably suck me back into the world of gaming, looks like.
Well, this could be game number 2 for you.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
It is going to be available for the PlayStation 4, which I think is the console you were talking about acquiring. So,
and here, just real quick, Peggy's got another comment. Looks like she's leaving the chat for tonight. She says, "I haven't worked with the courage to watch Dark Crystal yet, so this is probably where I should get off. 2 hours is about my limit." To you guys. Well, thank you for being here, Peggy. Thank you for your comments and being part of the Rogues Gallery and being part of the show. We greatly appreciate whenever people take the time to watch and participate and be part of our crazy little thing that we do here on Wednesdays. So thank you for being part of the show.
And I wonder if Peggy means she hasn't seen Age of Resistance or she has not seen Dark Crystal. I'd be curious to know that, Peggy. Because if you haven't seen, I would say watch either one. I would say, in fact, if you haven't seen Dark Crystal, I think you can watch Age of Resistance without even having seen Dark Crystal. So I'm curious about that, but she's probably gone. So we'll never know.
Well, there you go. Cool. And then Peggy actually says Age of Resistance.
Okay.
So, yeah. And anytime
we have a review on that.
We do. A very extensive audio review. So that was a very interesting. We both quite enjoyed Age of Resistance. So, and then we did miss a comment actually earlier from Chris Roberts where he says they were also talking about a spinoff with Arya Stark. So obviously talking about Game of Thrones. So
yeah, so I heard that talk, and it's just all talk as far as I can tell. I know that there was some talk, and I think the talk mainly came from fans on forums. I don't know if HBO ever advanced that talk or if the actress advanced that talk. Chris, if you know more information, please send it our way. If there's any buzz about an Arya Stark series, I'd like to know about it because I haven't heard anything other than the talk. I've never heard anybody get beyond that point of any formal process of making that show. The way television works, obviously, they pitch ideas all the time. And sometimes the people pitching those ideas are in the marketing department. It has nothing to do with anybody on the creative side. And they're just throwing ideas just to see if they get any traction. Then they'll go and find the creative types to actually make it happen. So I don't know where that is right now. I think it's mostly rumor.
Cool. Are we good to segue over to Streaming Wars now?
Sounds good to me.
All right, very cool. So our Streaming Wars segment, what we talk about is anything that's happening in the world of the streaming, basically live streaming or streaming media that has caught our attention. And whether you're talking about Netflix, whether you're talking about Disney Plus, Peacock, Hulu, HBO, Go Max or Max Go or whatever it's called, any of that stuff that's actually happening in the world of Streaming Wars. So I want to lead off real quick. I don't have a graphic. I don't have a story. I just have an observation. And I think Eric might have a story that might help to back this up. But I found this rather ironic. I've been reading a lot about the Zack Snyder cut. Now, I like the idea of the Zack Snyder cut because I would like to see what his original vision was for the film, just because I've enjoyed a lot of his movies, and I'm just genuinely curious to see what his original intention was with it versus the film that we actually got. How completely different it is or isn't from the film that we got remains to be seen until obviously we get the chance to watch the film. What I found really curious is I saw a bunch of news articles and items kind of over the last several days and talked about how that for, what is it? It's HBO Max or HBO Go? I think it's HBO Go. What is it called? Anyhow.
HBO Max.
HBO Max.
You're talking about what's coming. You're talking about what debuted basically today, right?
Yes. So here's my whole observation.
HBO Max. Yes, HBO Max.
HBO Max. The thing that I found most interesting about this is I saw a lot of different, angles on stories and stuff, and I had a hard time trying to pick one, which is why I just decided not to pick one at all, because they were all kind of dancing around the same issue, and I feel like I could just sum it up pretty succinctly like this. A lot of them were saying they wondered if the executives were hoping that basically the Zack Snyder Justice League could do for the new HBO streaming service what The Mandalorian has actually done for Disney Plus. Now, for me, I feel like that's apples and oranges, because here's the most important thing. It's not like the new HBO streaming service just rolled out with a Snyder Cut, because I was debating on getting the new service. I was like, okay, when do I need to get it? When do I need to get it? And I was looking into it today, and I honestly didn't realize that today was going to be the day that the service actually went live. And my main thing that's going to have me pull the trigger, I want to see that Snyder Cut. Well, Snyder Cut's not here. Snyder Cut isn't going to be here until 2021. So I was thinking, I'm probably good to wait then. I'm good to wait. So I'm not going to be jumping on HBO right away because I can afford to wait. Because that's the thing. I've noticed that with a lot of these streaming services, they have the same content problem. It almost feels like they're in such a hurry to roll these services out that they don't have really the content to really support what it is that they're trying to sell. Now, most of the stuff, now I will eventually get it because I love the Warner film library. There's a lot of great films that Warner Brothers has. That's probably eventually, if I get it before the Zack Snyder Cut even hits, that'll be probably what causes me to pull the trigger and to go ahead and check out the service and see what's going on with it. But I just find that it's just this recurring problem that we're seeing in the streaming wars. Everyone's rolling out, but the content, it just isn't quite there, the new content. And what I've also known as an independent publisher is this. I've learned this over the years too. Even though you may have a great series and you want to think it's an evergreen and people will continue to support and buy it and whatever, at the end of the day, people typically just judge you by the last thing you did. So if you don't have something that really acts as sort of the light post or the example of what you can do with your streaming service, you're kind of out in the cold. Regardless of what you think about, the CBS All Access with their Star Trek shows, at least they have those to lean on. Hulu's got not Hulu. Netflix is what I was thinking of. Netflix has got a lot of really great content that's constantly coming out. But there's a lot of other services that they're just not in that same boat. And I feel like with this HBO, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, I don't think HBO has anything new that's just kicking off with the launch of the service. Do they?
Well, as we like to always say, content is king, right?
Yeah.
Content is king. That's what's going to make or break any of these services. And yes, along those lines, I have this Verge article. And it says, HBO Max's catalog is full of weird holes. Quote, its library is impressive, but it's also impossible to know what to expect or what's coming. As HBO Max has arrived, bringing with it a precious few new original shows and an absolutely stuffed back catalog of terrific TV and movies. In addition to HBO's extremely good library, Max adds a mountain of content produced and or licensed by parent company Warner Media, like Friends and the Harry Potter franchise. It's enough to please someone of every taste, but the more you dig, the more you find strange holes in the library, and the more you realize it's not really clear what HBO Max is supposed to offer. Now, there's a really interesting part of the article here where they talk about specifically the DC properties, the Time Warner DC properties. It says Man of Steel is not available. In fact, none of the Superman live action movies or television shows, including Superman Returns, Smallville, or Lois and Clark, are included on HBO Max, at least initially. And they bring up the issue that you brought up months ago when we were talking about the streaming wars. DC Universe. DC Universe has most of that content. So in a way, HBO Max is competing against itself for legacy content, which I think is crazy.
See, that says to me, in all honesty, that and here's the thing that kills me. Here's the thing that kills me, okay? When I was at DC years ago, part of the point of the New 52 was to actually take the various DC properties and kind of get them all in line and kind of clean up some of the stuff that's happening with the histories and the connections and all the multiverses and all the other stuff, to make it a little bit easier for people to come into these various franchise properties, stories, such on and so forth. Because what they wanted to be able to do is take the characters of the DC universe and sort of leverage them, across all media. And they wanted it to be a little bit more interconnected. And they wanted to jettison a lot of stuff they didn't need that they felt was baggage. So it'd be easier to integrate these things into these various opportunities, whatever you want to call them, in order to maximize these properties. That was the whole point of the New 52, was to clear the slate and give them an easier to market and sell an entry point for new readers, new viewers, such on and so forth. And to have it be where the TV shows and the comics, their graphic novels, are more in line with each other. So if you're watching the show and you pick up a comic or you pick up a graphic novel, or you enjoy an animated show and you pick up a comic or you pick up a graphic novel, that they seem to be more in line with each other and not random, disparate things that have nothing to do with each other almost. So that was the whole point. So this Verge article really has me scratching my head, because it really feels like there's been no effort to really definitely integrate what's happening with the DC universe into the HBO Max service. And that's funny, because I remember when I used to listen and watch a lot of the other various movies and TV show commentary, YouTube shows and whatever, that I don't really watch anymore. There was a lot of discussion about the fact that the DC universe, a lot of people felt like, oh, it'll just be folded into HBO Max. And I thought, well, there's an interesting opportunity to leverage the value of the DC universe properties, specifically when you talk about their comics catalog, because they have a lot of digital comics that are available through DC universe. I have a lot of friends that they say that's the real value of the DC universe app, is all that amazing content that you have access to, because they're putting a lot of newer content available as well. And it actually got me started reading digital comics when I had my subscription to DC Universe. I don't have my DC Universe subscription anymore, but I'm reading a lot more digital comics now than I had before, and DC Universe was what got me into doing it. And I was really curious how they would take the strength of the DC Universe, integrate it, and leverage it to actually provide an extra selling advantage and some really unique content for HBO Max. But it looks like they're not doing any of that at all. It looks like they're literally going to be competing with each other. That's insane to me.
No, I think it is insane. But it's also interesting to note this article is all about legacy content. Like, they also talk about the fact that one of the Hobbit films is missing from the catalog, and all sorts of other random films that are missing. They actually even talk a little bit about the Merry Melodies and the fact that a lot of that stuff is missing. By the way, that's also a big criticism I have of Disney Plus, is there's tons of wonderful Walt Disney shorts that are missing from Disney Plus, probably mostly for reasons of political correctness and stuff like that. But that's probably the same thing that's happening on HBO Max. But this is all legacy content. None of this is new content that they're talking about. This article is pretty small, and they can't come up with one new show or movie or anything that is supposed to make me want to get HBO Max. And HBO Max, like every other streaming service, content is king. You know, I need the content. I need the content. The only thing we're talking about is a Snyder cut. That's the only thing we're talking about, which doesn't come out until March of next year. March of next year is when the Snyder cut is supposed to be coming out. It's not ready to go. And it's kind of interesting. Amanda Sam brings up a point with this. He says, reboots repeatedly milk recognized story properties at reduced investment risk. Snyder Cut news makes me wonder if releasing different cuts of the same movie will similarly offer new profits at lesser risk. Amanda Sam, I have to be honest with you. I don't know why they haven't been doing this, longer. Because to me, it absolutely makes sense to keep doing different cuts. Now, I should say there was a movement for a while, especially on DVD. When DVD started to get big, we started to see a lot of director cuts. Director cuts started to become a thing, and we started to see more and more director cuts. And something happened where I guess maybe they weren't as profitable as they were hoping. That's the only thing I can think of. Dave, we touched on the Donner cut when we were doing our Snyder cut coverage last week. And I often wonder, was maybe the Donner cut not that successful? And that's why you don't see more of that kind of stuff happening? Because to me, it would seem like an actual decent business decision to do this. So you're talking about, recognized properties, there's less risk. But I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't know how profitable these director cuts actually are, or how popular for that matter.
Well, I think it depends. It really, you're talking about content is king. I think it depends upon what the actual property is and what it is that you're doing with it. I personally, I really enjoy a lot of times the director's cuts. And for example, I said there's many examples where the director's cut is better than the original theatrical release. For example, the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie, not a great movie. But I feel like the director's cut is far superior to the one that actually came out in theaters. It still has a lot of the same problems, but at least the story seems more coherent, and there's a lot of things that just make more sense, and it's a little bit more engaging for me. I just find it more interesting. You look at things like Watchmen. There's a theatrical cut, a director's cut, and there's I forget what they call it, a renegade, whatever. They throw everything in Black Freighter and all that into one giant long thing. I quite liked the director's cut a little bit better than the theatrical. But I think for me, that's just the purest idea. Whether I can see the difference or not sometimes, I feel like I like the idea that I'm seeing the original vision as intended. I like that. I like that idea. So it's just like anything else. Sometimes it depends upon how you sell it. But I would say there are definitely examples where the director's cut is far superior to the film that was released theatrically. I think that Ben Affleck Daredevil for me is the easiest one to pull up off the top of my head. And then James Stone actually put in a comment. And he says, well, I like the theatrical cut of Daredevil, but the director's cut is superior. I think that's what he's getting at. Yeah, I mean, I personally, I feel that way too, James. And there's things I quite like in the theatrical cut, but I just feel like the director's cut just flows better, just works better. And you see examples too of sort of like where there was a vision and an idea that because of budget or whatever, it didn't actually make it to fruition. What I think of here is there's a different director's cut or a different cut of the Thomas Jane Punisher film. Tell me if you saw this one, Eric. Did you see the other cut of the Punisher film where they take the Tim Bradstreet illustrations and we get this opening sequence? It's sort of like Frank Castle's last military sort of mission before he leaves military service.
No, I've only seen the theatrical version.
Well, there's another version where there's this whole sequence they wanted to film that would actually open it up. And it's basically Frank Castle's last major military mission before he leaves military service. And in that one, they also there's a subplot that they integrate into the film. And it really kind of helps to kind of fill in some gaps in the storytelling. Sometimes they cut things for the sake of time with theatrical cuts. It makes sense. And then sometimes it just damages the storytelling, and it makes it feel truncated, and you can tell there's something not quite right. You don't know what it is, but there's an offbeat. It's like, that doesn't ring true. That doesn't quite make sense. Even though the story may flow, you can sometimes still feel it. Something's missing. Something's not right. So,
well, that happens all the time. That was one of the awesome things with deleted scenes. In fact, there's actually there's numerous great examples of that from the Back to the Future trilogy, of deleted scenes that actually explain little weird things in the movie that you're like, wait a second, that was a little off. That scene actually would have helped me understand what happened, but for whatever reason, they decided to take it out. Those decisions are made all the time. Sometimes it's just because of timing, and they're thinking that the film is going too long. And a lot of times the director will say right on the commentary, which, by the way, that's why director commentaries are so much fun, and such a thing. They're such a good thing if you're into the filmmaking process or interested in the filmmaking process to listen to a director's commentary. A lot of times they explain it. That was one of the great things when DVDs started to become popular, is you would get like these tons of deleted scenes, and the director would tell you exactly why he took that scene out, why it's not there anymore. And a lot of times I would question the director's decision. I'd be like, okay, that scene totally would have explained what happened later way better than what we got in the theatrical version. But they were the one that decided to take it out. They were the one that actually said this doesn't work, or it doesn't flow, or whatever. Heck, I still want to see Biggs in Star Wars. It's kind of funny because we were touching upon George Lucas's various versions of Star Wars, the original movie, and some people think it's almost an abomination now in terms of the special edition. But I still want to see the scene with Biggs when they're at the whatever that is. I can't remember where they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be hanging out somewhere, picking up power converters or whatever.
Yeah.
I still want to see that, but it's gone. And you know what I mean? The only way you can see it is a really crappy version that they put like on basically a CD-ROM release. It's like the only version that you can find, which I remember that CD-ROM when it came out. And that was the big selling point of it, that they had that scene on there. And that's all there is. So, the directors make all sorts of questionable decisions, and then they question their own decisions much later about whether that was right or wrong. How much of these director cuts are their original vision, and how much of it is them just, coming back later and saying, man, I really wish I did that differently. And I have two people correcting me and helping me here, Chris Roberts and James Stone. Tashi Station. Yes, Tashi Station. The Tashi Station scene. But I've always heard that Lucas has said it just would not have worked. It just did not flow right with that scene. And then there was no way to bring it back, because in that scene, Luke is actually observing the battle that we see in the first scene of the movie. And that would make the movie very different. If the first time we saw Luke, it's him looking at the battle, and we know he saw the battle, as opposed to the way that we're introduced to Luke later, which of course is iconic for fans, seeing him with the silhouette and all that kind of stuff. So I get it. But a lot of these director cuts, I mean, they can get weird. But I do want to go back to Man of Sand's earlier point, or musing, or however you want to call it. The big question is not whether these director cuts are any good. One of the questions here is, are they profitable? And is this a possible trend that could continue forward? And my thought is they're not. Because if they were, that trend would have continued, and we would have kept seeing more director cuts coming out all the time. I have a feeling a lot of these director cuts did not do well in terms of the money put in and the money that they got out.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I could see that. But what's interesting too is there's a lot of stories coming out, again, talking about the Zack Snyder cut. And apparently the Zack Snyder cut, part of the reason it's being funded is because they're primarily using it, which makes a lot of sense. They're using it as a publicity tool for HBO Max, which makes a lot of sense. My only thinking is it's like if they really wanted to use the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League to sell HBO Max, maybe HBO Max they should have given it another year, spent a little bit more time on some other content and stuff, for it, newer shows, whatever, and then try and roll it out. But you know what? At the end of the day, apparently everyone's just going to roll these services out as soon as they think they're ready, even when they're not, because everybody's got to get to Tashi Station and get those power converters.
That's definitely a good way of putting it. I did want to mention one more thing for Streaming Wars, real briefly, just because this is such an interesting and strange article that I hadn't heard anything about before. And I just thought it was something that would be fun to just have our viewers be aware of, and also you, Dave, if you haven't heard about this. So this is from a site called venturebeat.com, and this is it says how Cinelytic is using AI to help Hollywood reboot for the streaming wars. And this is a pretty long article, and it gets a little bit technical in some places. So I'll try to give you basically the Reader's Digest version of it, okay? Basically, this company has come up with an AI tool to help these new streaming providers that are just getting into the game. We're talking about HBO Max, first and foremost. We're talking about services like Peacock. We're talking about services like Disney Plus, because they don't have the experience in the streaming platforms that Amazon and Netflix do. And what that really comes down to is they don't have the raw data that Netflix and Amazon do. One thing that I always think is interesting about the streaming wars and streaming platforms in general is how closed off they are. You don't really know how successful a show is on Netflix. You just don't know. They do not release their numbers. That stuff is all internal. So you really don't know what's a hit and what isn't. I know Nielsen is trying to work on that so that they can get ratings for streaming platforms. In fact, I know they did that with Amazon, where there was a thing where they've started doing that with them. But strictly speaking, they only do it if you're watching it on your television. So like if you have a smart TV, they're calculating that. But if you're watching it on your laptop, they're not calculating that. And that's a legitimate gripe of streaming platforms. But because Amazon and Netflix have been around so long, they are sitting on just what's, data that's basically worth its weight in gold, because they have all this user information, just pools and pools of user information. And of course, they use that information to make their content, to tailor their content, to decide what does our audience want? What is our audience going to be interested in? Well, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Peacock don't have that advantage because they're just starting out. Disney Plus hasn't been around long enough where they can really kind of know their users. This is all about data mining. This is what the whole point of the internet is in the first place. It's all about data mining. And Netflix and Amazon are so far ahead of these other platforms that they need a way to catch up. So this company has come up with an AI system so that they can start to catch up. And it's really crazy. It's really interesting because they're talking about things like basically an executive at a studio is going to be able to say, okay, so let's just say, for example, we're going to do that Game of Thrones series with Arya Stark that was mentioned earlier in the program. Okay, let's see how this works. So we're going to put in Arya Stark into this AI and see how that seems to trend with our audience. Is that something that they want? Then we can, maybe trend the name of the actress and see if her name is popular with them. And then maybe all of a sudden they decide, you know what? Actually, who's really popular is this actress. So what if we recast Arya Stark? Will that give us more money? That's how intense this program is. That's the kind of stuff they're talking about doing, is being able to put that kind of information in so that you can get that leg up and you can theoretically know which programs you're doing are going to be more popular and ultimately more profitable. It's really crazy. It's really, really interesting stuff. And again, it's like, it's not like Netflix and Amazon aren't doing the same thing. It's just that they're doing it a completely different way because they already have all the data on their audience and they're able to just plug those kinds of things in already. I mean, that's the whole point. You know, it's like you don't even need a test audience anymore because you have all this data and you can tell, like for instance, on my Netflix account, you can tell which actors it is that I'm watching, which actors tend to be popular for me. So what this AI is doing is it's trying to help these other players in the streaming wars catch up so they can do the same thing that ultimately Amazon and Netflix have probably been doing for the last 5 years, at least. It's pretty interesting.
Well, that is interesting. And along those same lines, I have something that looks like it's actually trying to break right now. Comicbook.com is actually reporting, and I'm going to segue why I'm going to throw this in here in just a second. Henry Cavill returning as Superman for future DC Comics movies. So it says, after news of Zack Snyder's Justice League stunned many DC Comics fans, the hits just keep on coming now as it appears that Henry Cavill will once again reprise his role as Superman in future projects for Warner Brothers Pictures. Comic.com has learned that Cavill reprised the role of Clark Kent, though for now a sequel to Man of Steel is not currently in the works with the studio. Instead, it sounds like Cavill's Superman will operate in a similar capacity to Marvel's use of Nick Fury and the Hulk, appearing in films in a supporting role or even smaller cameos. And then it goes on to say the new deal is part of the reason that Cavill appeared on Zack Snyder's live stream rewatch of Man of Steel last week, the same stream where Snyder announced that his cut of Justice League is coming to HBO Max. Cavill debuted as Superman as Man of Steel and played the role again as Superman, Dawn of Justice, blah, 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 blah. So the reason I'm bringing this up, and someone just sent this to me, the reason I'm bringing it up, because I feel like it dovetails into this, because there is a very strong, positive feeling for Henry Cavill as Superman amongst a lot of people. A lot of people didn't care for Man of Steel, but a lot of people do feel like that Cavill, makes a good Superman. And he seems to be, very popular with the idea of him playing Superman. And I know there was a lot of people upset at the fact when they found out that he was basically done as Superman. And I could see where this AI, if they're using this, if they're floating these ideas around, because a lot of this stuff with them announcing the Snyder Cut, did you notice how much of that was featuring Cavill as Superman? Because there's a lot of people that want to see Cavill in that black Superman suit from the Death of Superman storyline. And I have this, I wonder if that announcement in conjunction with the Zack Snyder cut, because of the movement for that film and this, I wonder if they're all, kind of connected.
Well, I think they are. I mean, obviously Henry Cavill is in Justice League and he's going to be in the Snyder cut. They're not going to recast him. I mean, they're not going to do that. That's not going to happen. So I mean, they're related just on the surface of things. There's no doubt in my mind they're related. And I think you're right. There's a lot of fans that even if they don't really like the films, they like him. They like him in that role.
Yeah.
So I think that there's definitely a lot of fans that feel that way.
I have this feeling that there could be something to, them plugging data or having information or whatever and extrapolating out these different things that they go, oh, we should probably do this, we should probably do that. With all this interest all of a sudden and all of a sudden, Warner's and HBO is leaning into the Zack Snyder cut really heavy. And then this other news is breaking. I just wonder if it's that same idea. It's like that this data, is beginning to support the idea that's like, oh, well, maybe the DCEU wasn't as bad as we thought. Maybe we can still turn this around and make this work and actually have our investment pay off, by retooling a few things and looking at this in a different perspective. I don't know. I just feel like these things are connected a little bit more than maybe we initially realize.
Well, Bobby had this comment earlier. He said, when I was talking, he said, "That's crazy. Analytics are going to drive the direction of creativity," and it is to a certain extent, Bobby. Well, I should say, it's already been happening. The point of this article is to basically say Amazon and Netflix have already been doing this because they have enough data that they're able to do this without this AI. They already have it. They already have the AI within their programs to kind of understand these things. And it's not so much about about the direction of the creativity as it is about what we're just talking about right now, things like casting decisions and what actors are trending and what actors are popular for this particular brand. What do people want to see? Do they want to see Henry Cavill as Superman? Or do they want to see Brandon Roth come back as Superman? Or do they want to see somebody else be Superman? That's kind of the thing that's going on here. And this has been going on for a long time. They use other methods such as, Google Trends. You see what's trending along with Snyder Cut. Anybody who does marketing, they're looking at that. And if they see that Henry Cavill's name is trending right along with Snyder Cut, then stuff like what Dave is just talking about, that's how it happens. Then they start to say, okay, we need to talk to Henry Cavill about coming back. You know what I mean? Or doing more because he's really trending along with what we're doing right now. And they coincide together. So this stuff has been happening, I think, for a long time. I don't know. I can't say specifically, in this circumstance or that circumstance, that's what happened. But I could totally see it happening is what I'm trying to say. Because when they see what's going on with all this, with all the search engine activity, which you and I can do that. You and I can go look and see what's popular, for various search terms and how much is being searched and in what context and what other things are being searched along with this same thing. That's just what they're doing. They're trying to collate all that data so they can look at that kind of stuff and make those kinds of decisions and decide, yeah, we're gonna bring back Henry Cavill. We're gonna bring back Brandon Roth. Chris Roberts says Brandon Roth did come back as Superman on TV for Legends of Tomorrow, which was actually something that Dave covered quite a bit on our program. The whole TV Legends of Tomorrow, and also the whole Crisis of Infinite Earths. You did a lot of coverage of that, Dave.
Yeah, we did. I think it was when the show was more an audio show, and then we actually did an add-on supplement specifically about Superman and talking about what was potentially, hopefully, we thought at that time, going to be happening with the Crisis event. So
we actually have we have several trailer reactions for Crisis of Infinite Earths on the YouTube. A couple of them. I think there was at least 2 trailers that we did trailer reactions to.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember because I know we did an audio special about it too. Because I remember because my brother actually came on, and we did a Superman specific special episode and talked about Crisis too. We did a lot of coverage for Crisis. I was very excited for Brandon Routh to be playing the quote unquote Kingdom Come, version of Superman. And I still think there's a lot of potential there. If they were to actually test that information, I think they determine it's like, oh, there's a lot of interest in this. So I'm not sure the max potential for that has been reached yet. So,
well, that's potentially the kind of thing they would use this AI for, is to see would Brandon Roth work as Superman again. Yeah. That's really what this AI would be meant to be used for. That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Do you have anything else for Streaming Wars, or is that good?
No, that's it. That's all I got.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, let's go ahead and maybe we'll segue over into our main topic for tonight's show.
Bobby had just one last quick question about this topic, and he said, "Do you feel that it takes away from the passion of the project?" And Bobby, I'm very different in the way that I view filmmaking because I actually primarily work as a producer. So I try to look at the entire picture. And so that means that I have to look at budget, I have to look at casting, I have to look at story, I have to look at all sorts of different things. Whereas when you talk about people that are more only, I should say, I can't say only, because even people that are highly creative in Hollywood at high levels have to think about the same things I'm thinking about right now. Directors have to think about this kind of stuff, and generally people say that film is a director's craft. That's generally the way that that's generally the way it's perceived. Directors are the artist, if you are, of the film world. Just as actors, their main thing is theater. Okay, and then you talk about writing. It's like novels, novelizations, and you can go on and on and on with different jobs. But when you're trying to produce a film, you have to look at all of that stuff because you want the film to be seen, you want it to be profitable. You have to think about all those kinds of stuff. So I actually get passionate about all those things. I don't just get passionate about the story, which I do get very passionate about, because when I see a good story, I'm like, this is cool. I want to do this. But I have to think about the other aspects of it. And for me, that's still fun. Now, for other people, they might care less. They could care less about all that stuff. But for me, I feel like it's just part of the gig. So I don't think it really takes away from the passion of the project. Like, I would love a tool where I could actually look and see, kind of almost in real time, as I'm considering someone for a particular role. And by the way, I'm not at the level where I would be able to do this because I'm dealing with actors that you've never heard of. But if I had that ability, I just think it would be such an amazing tool to have. So it wouldn't just be my opinion. You see, that's the other side of it. Is it wouldn't just be my opinion. It wouldn't just be me saying, you know what, I prefer Brandon Roth over Henry Cavill as Superman. That's I just like him. He reminds me of Christopher Reeves, and I just feel like he should be Superman. And I'm just making that decision based on what I think. And that's basically the way decisions are made in Hollywood. They decide, well, this is who I think would do it right. Of course, there's market research and all that kind of stuff, but a lot of it is subjective. It's their opinion. And it would be nice to have a tool where I had numbers to back up my opinion and say, oh, yeah, well, a lot of other people think the same thing you do. They totally think the same thing you do. Or it would be nice to be able to say, no, they don't. Like, yeah, there are people that think that, but far more people actually think Henry Cavill would be a much better Superman. That's the kind of decisions that I think that it would be nice to have in your toolkit when you're trying to make a movie.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. And there's been much made about market research and anecdotal data that they use in order to help hopefully inform and help them to make a better decision. So this AI component doesn't seem completely out of left field. It seems to fit within the narrative of what they've been trying to do. Mitigate risk and mitigate risk. And find a way to maximize profits at the end of the day. And if they could use stuff like this in order to determine this person might be a better choice for this role versus this other person. I don't know if it necessarily means the creative direction suffers, to be honest, Bobby. It in all honesty, it depends upon the project itself. I'm working on a project right now, and it's not my original idea, but someone else brought me in, thought I'd be good for this one particular thing, and I'm enjoying and I'm jazzed for the project because I like their idea so much. So, I don't think that you being brought on, what I mean, necessarily not having quote unquote total creative freedom means that that the production would necessarily suffer. I think it depends upon the cares of all the different people associated with it and how much of an effort and how well it does when it turns time to reach out, with that project and try and find, support for it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Cool. All right. Are we good to move over to our main topic?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So for tonight's retrospective review, we're going to be talking about Back to the Future Part 3. I'm
not sure if we have an audio problem or if, Dave, are you there?
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I had my mic muted. I'm sorry. So I was just talking about Back to the Future Part 3, and apologize for that. I didn't realize my mic was muted. So did we even get the setup, or did it cut off?
Yeah, we didn't get anything. So
okay, all right.
Yep.
So let me just set it back up.
Yep.
So for tonight's retro retrospective review, we're talking Back to the Future Part 3. And the way that the retro retrospectives typically work, we want to talk about how we first heard about the film back in the day, our initial impressions of it, or how we felt about it back then. And then we've rewatched the film recently. So we want to talk about how we feel about the film today in a more modern context. So I'll start off here just real quick. I watched, I'm trying to remember how I was just reminiscing. I was trying to remember exactly how it was I first heard about Back to the Future Part 3. I'm pretty sure it was at the end of Back to the Future Part 2, because Back to the Future Part 2 pretty much ends with a teaser trailer for Back to the Future Part 3. I grew up as a kid actually watching and loving a lot of Westerns. I loved watching Lone Ranger growing up, and I was a big fan of actually the Bonanza show and also Big Valley. I loved all those shows. And I remember watching all kinds of Westerns with my mom, Support Your Local Sheriff, all those kind of fun things. I remember watching shows even like Paladin. So I'm a big fan of Westerns to begin with. And so I was very excited for this particular installment of Back to the Future Part 3. And then I remember we did see this one. I did see this in the movie theaters, and I just remember loving it. I don't remember having a lot of issues other than just loving it and feeling very fulfilled with how everything kind of ends. I felt like it ended on like a really good note. So that was how I first heard about it, and that was my initial impressions when I watched Back to the Future Part 3 when it originally came out. So tell me, Eric, how did you first hear about Back to the Future Part 3?
Well, as you mentioned, there's a trailer for what basically a highlight reel actually of Back to the Future Part 3 at the end of Back to the Future Part 2. In fact, I thought it was interesting that they included that with the version of the film that's on Netflix, and they did so because that is the theatrical version. When you went to the theaters, they basically had a commercial for Back to the Future 3 at the end of the movie. And I don't know if I can't think of any prominent movies off the top of my head that did that. The closest thing we might have right now is kind of what like the MCU does, where the MCU kind of has teasers, but the teasers they have are in universe. They're not specifically ads for the next movie. And Back to the Future Part 2 basically has an ad for Back to the Future Part 3 at the end of the movie, which I think is really kind of quirky and kind of fun and interesting in a way, because for me, it really, takes me back to that place in time. And so I absolutely knew about Back to the Future 3 because I saw I used to watch the credits and things like that as a kid. I used to like the score and the music. And so a lot of times I would hang out. Plus, I was always waiting to see Skeletor again come out of the sludge. And so, yeah, I saw the commercial there in the theater. And so I knew Back to the Future Part 3 was coming out. And so I was all ready to go and ended up seeing in the theater once again when Back to the Future 3 part came out.
Very cool. So what were your initial feelings about Back to the Future Part 3 when you originally saw it?
I remember liking it. I don't remember liking it as much as Back to the Future Part 2. I enjoyed it. I grew up watching Westerns, so I certainly had an affinity for Westerns, but it wasn't like Westerns were my favorite thing. Sci-fi was my favorite thing growing up. I always liked sci-fi. The sci-fi genre was always the coolest thing to me. Things like Star Trek and Star Wars. That was my bread and butter. And Back to the Future, at least initially, really fell into that, very well, very well. Back to the Future Part 3 is a little weird because it really is a Western. There are obviously some sci-fi elements in it, particularly obviously with the time travel and everything. But it really is a Western. And it's funny, I looked at some interviews and things like that from Michael J. Fox and from the creative team, and everybody basically said, yeah, we really wanted to make a Western. We wanted to make a Western, and so that's what we did. It is interesting also, by the way, there's a lot of foreshadowing in Back to the Future Part 2 related to Back to the Future Part 3 because the films were made back to back. There's a lot of backs. So because the films were made together at the same time and they knew exactly where the story was going, there's a lot of actual references. There's a lot of elements of Back to the Future Part 2 that are relevant for Back to the Future Part 3. And that was really interesting to kind of make those connections as I saw it in the theater, when I was much younger. And so I enjoyed it, although I thought it was a little different. What did you think, Dave?
Well, like I said, I remember just thoroughly enjoying it when I saw it in theaters. I didn't have a lot of harsh opinions on it. I do remember that I felt like that I enjoyed it more than the second one. But I think, again, like I said, like I like Westerns and I like those kind of settings. So it kind of spoke to me, probably more than a different film might not have. It just wouldn't, I don't know. It's such a weird mixture of elements. But for me, it just really worked. I saw some people, as I was reviewing information for this particular show tonight, and they talked about how that Back to the Future Part 3 is one of those, rare, really great steampunk movies, which is interesting because that follows in line, to be a lot of elements of the film. But I don't know if I've ever thought of it in just exactly those kind of terms. And then just real quickly, because I forgot to do the summary and some other information real quick. So Back to the Future Part 3 came out in 1990. The summary is just real quickly. Stranded in 1955, Marty McFly learns about the death of Doc Brown in 1885 and must travel back in time to save him. With no fuel readily available for the DeLorean, the two must figure out how to escape the Old West before Emmett is murdered. Of course, this stars Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Mary Steenburgen, she's new to the cast, Thomas F. Wilson, Leah Thompson, Elizabeth Shue, and such on and so forth, including a lot of really important, actually, Western actors known for a lot of their contributions, such as Matt Clark, Richard Dysart, Pat Buttram, and Harry Carey, and Dub Taylor, to name just a few. Of course, James Tolkien also comes back, because James Tolkien is just one of those great character actors in a lot of things. This film, of course, was directed like the other ones by Robert Zemeckis. It was written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale. Actually, it's quite a few. Yeah, Robert Zemeckis, Bob Gale. And of course, this score is also by Alan Silvestri, who did the last two films as well. And I think the score for this one is quite good. Like I said, I remember back in the day seeing it and just thoroughly enjoying the film. I don't remember having any kind of negative reaction about it at all. I thought it was neat because, well, let's go ahead and segue in how we feel about the film today, because I feel like I'm ready to talk about it in a broader context before I get too much further. Is there anything else you want to add, Eric, about any particular recollection or thoughts or feelings that you might have had about when you saw the film back in the day that you can think of?
No, not off the top of my head. Like I said, I did see it in the theater. I do remember enjoying it, but I also remember thinking it was a very different movie than the first two, which it is. It is a very different movie than the first two.
It is. It is a very different film, and that's one of the things I actually like about this one. So we've talked about how we first heard about the film. We've talked about how we felt about the film when we saw it back in the day. So now we're going to talk about how we feel about the film today in a modern context, actually having recently revisited it. One of the things I really like about this film that I remember back in the day and also now is I do like the idea that we get to see Doc Brown be more the hero. He's not quite the sort of bumbling mad scientist that he is in the first two films. And that's actually very fun and kind of refreshing because you see him being a little bit more confident, a little bit more sure at times of the things that he's doing. And I think it's because of the successes that he's had with his time machine. You know, when we see him in the first film, he's so excited that the DeLorean actually works, that the time machine works. He's so excited he's inventing something that actually works. Because you get the feeling that his life has been met with a lot of failure, as a scientist and as an inventor, trying to aspire to be one of those great men of science, that he's experienced a lot of failure and maybe doesn't have the confidence, that we see displayed in Back to the Future Part 3. And I think it's because of all the successes with the time travel and with the DeLorean, why he has quite the more heroic turn that he actually has in this film, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And so among the things I really like about this is I love that. I love a lot of the interesting callbacks that because we learned a lot more about Doc Brown in this film than we learned about some of the others. We learned that he loves Jules Verne. He talks a lot about that and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And it's just very interesting. And one of the things I remember back in the day, and then also today, reflecting upon it, is I remember back then thinking, it's like, wow, those stories were that old that they were first published back during the days that there was, steam locomotives and people riding around on horses. Because I don't think of the films and those stories that, not the films, but the stories that inspired a lot of the films, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which of course is a classic Disney film. I don't think of them as being that old, but man, those stories have been around for a long time. So how do I feel about the film today? I'd say the film is highly worth watching. I think it's definitely worth revisiting. If you haven't seen in a little while, it's actually Back to the Future Part 3 is actually celebrating an anniversary right now. So it's a good time actually to revisit Back to the Future Part 3. And so I say I'd highly recommend it. I think that would be it for me. I just said highly recommend it. So tell me, Eric, how do you feel about the film today?
Yeah, there's something really interesting that you said that I feel like I have to comment on right away. Otherwise, I'll lose the thought, because I kind of had it during the movie as well. There's an interesting scene because you were talking about the Jules Verne references, and that's of course the way that Doc Brown connects. It's Clara, right? That's her name. The name of the character,
yes,
the teacher.
Yes. Yeah.
Clara.
Clara.
Right?
Clara Clayton, because was it Clayton?
Clayton Ravine, where all the teachers are supposed to go die, which I do remember reacting to that as a kid. I do remember reacting to that idea that the kids were all making fun of, they all wanted their teachers to fall into the ravine.
Right.
But there's a really interesting thing about that, because you were talking about, in the one sense, it's like it's kind of strange to think that stuff was popular so long ago, but in a real way, it wasn't that long ago, and we kind of forget that this was still this was the beginning of the modern age. And there's a really interesting scene where Doc Brown is talking to Clara about the wonders of the future and talking about men blasting off into space. And she just kind of laughs at him, because you can tell Doc Brown is kind of like, I'm giving her like this great insight into the future. And she's all like, oh, I read that book, To the Moon. I read that book. I know exactly what you're talking about. So it's kind of funny. There's an idea in there that a well-educated person like herself, who's a school teacher, she totally understands this concept of being able to blast off and go to the moon. Because those concepts were already being put into people's minds at that time. And it makes you realize, in a way, how connected those people were with even how we are today, because so many of the modern trappings were already starting. Granted, they didn't have, automobiles and things like that, but they had trains. You know what I mean? And so that people were starting to think in those different directions. Their minds were starting to open up. And I just think that's kind of interesting. It was just something that I as you were talking, it just kind of made me go in the opposite direction a little bit about how sort of connected that time period is in a lot of ways to our own. And we just don't realize it. We just don't think in those terms because we think of it as being so foreign, but it's really not. It's nowhere near as foreign as, say, if you had gone to, the ancient Roman Empire or something like that, where, you might have been burned as a heretic or something like that. They were pretty much getting beyond that point, in history. So Clara is able to understand Doc Brown in a lot of ways, and she's able to relate to him, even though he's talking about these crazy things, you know what I mean? Because to her, they're really not that crazy. She's kind of heard of them before, at least the concept,
And that's an interesting kind of observation. And it's definitely the opposite of what I was kind of thinking of. I wasn't thinking of it as being closer, I mean, I guess for my mind anyway, I think of those days as being further off in the distance than they really sometimes, I guess, kind of are. And I guess I don't know. I guess that's sort of just my particular perspective on this. But the point you make is very interesting. So would you say that you would recommend people to revisit Back to the Future Part 3?
I would. I absolutely would recommend that people revisit Back to the Future Part 3. I do think it's very different than the other films. There's no doubt about that in my mind, that it is different. And for some people, it might be a little bit jarring in a way. I mean, but the basic premise is still there, right? They're still traveling back in time. They're still going back and forth, that kind of a thing. They're trying to change the timeline. They've got that kind of strange version of time travel, I would say, that I think is, I'll just say that I think is impossible, but I prefer sort of the MCU version of time travel. I think that makes more sense. But it's still fun. It's still fun. It's still within the context of the other films. It's just a little bit different. That's all I would say, is that Back to the Future Part 3 is a little bit different than the other films, obviously because of the genre, because it is a Western film, and I think should be regarded that way. And I think it's interesting that you brought up the idea of it being a steampunk film, because I never really thought of it that way. But certainly you could make that argument that this is probably one of the most successful steampunk films ever made. I think you could make that argument, especially with the way that Doc Brown is back in the past. He definitely is very steampunk. And he actually, the ending, he's shown to be the ultimate steampunk, so there's definitely that argument to be made that this is a steampunk film.
Yeah, it's just an interesting connection. I'd read someone else had kind of made that comment, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought of it in that context, but it does, kind of ring true. We do have a couple comments here real quick. James Stone says, from the Rogues Gallery, says, as an 11-year-old, I was more interested in hoverboards than horses, but Part 3 was fun. And then Bobby Chambers says, did you see the Doc's son giving the finger on the last scene? I wonder if that's cut out of the Netflix version.
I never noticed that. That's another one I've never noticed.
Yeah,
I had no idea he was doing that.
That's hilarious.
I've never noticed that. I'll have to go back and watch, and that's pretty funny to say if that was censored. And who knows? Maybe we'll make some news here. We'll find out that it was censored. They doctored Part 3 too.
Wow,
those bastards. No, I didn't know that. I did not know that the Doc's son is giving the finger in the theatrical version. And he said, "Yep, go back." He said he flips the bird.
I remember he's kind of fidgety. I do remember that he was kind of fidgety, but I don't remember that he specifically flipped the bird. But I'll have to look into it now, just out of curiosity, just to see.
I remember even as a kid, though. I thought that the Doc Brown's kids were just like so wooden, and I was all like, why don't they have like any personality like at all? You know what I mean? And granted, it was just show them off and then put them away,
Yeah.
Oh, James Stone says he was deaf and he signaled he had to use the bathroom.
Wow.
And maybe that's why I have that. That's why I had that thought of them being kind of wooden. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. I had no idea. I didn't know about either one of those things.
Wow. Crazy. Interesting. Huh. Well, there you go. Learn something new. Bobby Chambers comments. He says, "Well, that kills the humor of it." Unfortunately, Bobby, it does.
That's what knowledge does sometimes. That's what knowledge does sometimes.
Here's a cold glass of water to pour on our fun. Right there. There you go. There you go, everybody. No, I'm just kidding. Well, that's interesting. I'll have to rewatch that last part again now because now I'm curious.
And I'm gonna look up the signing for I need to go to the bathroom so I can confirm what James is saying.
and then James is saying that it's actually on the Blu-ray commentary. He believes so. Wow, learn something new every day. I'll be honest. The Back to the Future films were the one of those. I have it on Blu-ray for the show. I actually watched it on Netflix, actually for our reviewing purposes here. But I don't think I've ever delved too far into the special features on the Back to the Future Blu-rays. I just don't think I have. I think it's because I watched that back in time, the Back to the Future documentary, and probably felt like, it's probably got it covered. But I should have known better because, for example, like if you're a fan of Alien or Aliens, and you watch Memory. Memory is this really current, recent documentary, talking about Alien and Aliens and the impact that the films had, on films and culture and such on and so forth. But that Memory film, what's kind of interesting, it's very surface and doesn't have anywhere near the depth of the content or the interesting commentary on making the film, as well as the film, sort of in its legacy state. As if you actually watch, they had this Alien quadrilogy where they took the 5 Alien films or whatever, and they smashed them in this one giant DVD box set. That has some of the most amazing stuff. Like when you go through and you look at and watch some of those documentaries where they talk about the creation of the various Alien films, it's so terribly interesting, and they get into all kinds of nuance. The craziest one, of course, is Alien 3 and what happened with that film. But I think I just assumed because I'd watched the Back in Time documentary, I thought it was probably good. So I haven't spent as much time actually looking at the special features and listening to the director's commentaries on Back to the Future that's on the Blu-rays. But since you brought it up, James, I begin to realize that was probably short-sighted of me, and I should actually revisit those films and actually watch them, in the Blu-ray format, maybe with the commentary on, and see what other interesting things I can learn. Thanks for pointing that out. I had no idea.
Well, along those lines, because I mentioned it earlier about the fact that there are scenes that are omitted from this version of the film that are on the DVD special edition, and I never owned it. My roommate did, and I watched all of the DVD, the deleted scenes with the commentary on. And one of the scenes that's most interesting, and it really would have just, I think, killed the film if they'd kept it in, but it totally explained what was going on. If anybody remembers, obviously the marshal, who's played by the same actor who played the school principal or the dean of students, he plays the town marshal, and the town marshal is nowhere to be found when Marty has his confrontation with Mad Dog. In fact, when Mad Dog is finally brought to justice, it's by his deputy and a posse. Now, the reason for that, and this is something, it's not technically a spoiler because it was taken out of the movie. It's just one of these weird things about the movie. Well, what happened was, what was supposed to happen is Mad Dog murdered the marshal in front of his son. Because if you remember in the movie, he actually is sitting there with his son and talking to him about discipline and the fact that you can't give these guys an inch. That's when he disarms Mad Dog and his crew. So obviously the marshal's competent and he keeps an eye on Mad Dog, but he's actually shot in the back and murdered by Mad Dog Tannen in this deleted scene. And it totally explained why the marshal wasn't there and why the marshal didn't intervene in the gunfight. But it was just like this incredibly depressing scene of seeing this man murdered in front of his son, which of course happened in the Old West. That's that kind of stuff actually happened. And they took it out. But it's pretty interesting when you talk about that extra content. If you haven't seen it, it's just a crazy scene. And I'm like, oh, I totally understand. I totally understand why they shot this, and then I totally understand why they took it out.
Wow, that to me is kind of crazy. I had again, like I said, I'd never spent a lot of time diving into the Back to the Future features that are available on the Blu-rays. That's crazy to me. And of course, that actor, that's actually James Tolkien. James Tolkien was a great character actor. The films I think of him most for, besides Back to the Future films, I think of him because he's actually the police officer that's actually trailing He-Man, Teela, and Gweldor in the Master Universe film. But he is also, I can't remember if I think he's the first. I think he's the first. When you watch Top Gun, I think he is actually Maverick's commanding officer at the beginning of the film. He's the one that basically tells him, it's like, you've got I can't believe I'm going to do this. You got your dream shot. You're going to go up against the best at Top Gun. I believe James Tolkien plays that role as well. He's one of those great character actors. You would have seen him in more things over the years. And I have this horrifying feeling that maybe there's a reason that we haven't seen him doing more over the years, but or maybe it's just because those initial roles are so memorable. No, yeah, James Tolkien's really awesome too. But I don't know if I would have enjoyed watching him get shot in the back, because like I said, I kind of liked this character, even though he was a bit of a funny.
Well, it's a crazy scene to watch. It's just like, wow. This was supposed to be in a comedy, but it was meant for the narrative to explain why the marshal isn't there and why he doesn't intervene. Obviously, he was killed. That was the idea. But I remember that on the commentary, the director even said, it's like, after we did this, we realized, like, we have to kill Mad Dog. Like, we can't let him live. And of course, Mad Dog can't die because he has descendants and stuff like that. So it's like, all right, we need to get rid of this scene and we need to redo this. And then if you recall, when the posse comes in, it's actually, they say something about a robbery that Mad Dog did instead of saying they're coming to get him for killing the marshal, because that's the original idea would have been that the posse comes in because Mad Dog murdered the marshal, So yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy, crazy, crazy.
Well, very, very cool. I had no idea. I'm gonna have to dive into some of these features on the Back to the Future discs, and apparently I've missed a ton of interesting things that are worth exploring on them. Very cool, very cool. Do we feel like that's good for our review of Back to the Future Part 3?
Yes, I think we're good on that very cheery note.
All right, well, there you go. There you go. All right. All right. If that's good, I think we'll go ahead and we'll segue into the outro. So I want to thank you all for having watched this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. Again, I've been one of your hosts. My name is Dave Beatty. You can learn more about me, see some of my artwork, as well as download that all-important Retro Rogues fanzine, the first digital copy of it, at my website. It's at davebeatty.com. That's www.davebeaty.com. And also, too, you can also do www.retrogues.com, because the Retro Rogues website is actually active as well. It's an extension of my Dave Beatty website, but you can get there typing in retrorogues.com as well. But please continue to tell people about the magazine, and let's continue to get people into all the fun stuff that we're doing here. Please tell people about the show. Let people know about it. Maybe share an episode or two tell them to check it out. Tell them that we want to come on here and be members of the Rogues Gallery. And I didn't make a big deal about it, but we are returning to the sketch card giveaway. We're going to try and give this Flash Gordon card away again, because every time I try to give it away for one reason or another, it doesn't work out. But again, the rules for the sketch card giveaway, just real quick. And there's other packages went into the mail, so hopefully you all should be receiving them shortly. The way this works is you need to be over the age of 18. Can you tell I'm tired? You need to be over the age of 18. And then secondly, please also be in the United States. Just makes it easier for me on shipping. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to see everyone who made a comment. I'm going to take your names out. I'm going to throw them. I don't use a hat. I actually have an old Incredible Hulk. It's like we're going trick-or-treating. It's like the Incredible Hulk head. Take things and throw them in there. I'm going to shake them up. I'm going to pull one out. Hopefully someone will win this. I'll contact you just directly through Facebook or Twitter or wherever it is that you are commenting from. And then there you go. Hopefully someone will be able to have this going home with them hopefully soon. I want to thank Eric Alexander for being back on the show, providing his very special insight. I always enjoy the things that he finds for the streaming wars. Always provides me with some interesting things to think about, and all the other fun commentary. So thanks again for being on the show again, Eric. And please tell the folks, hopefully watching or listening at home, where they can learn more about you on the interwebs.
Well, I'm most active on Twitter, and you can reach me there at BassGod14, at BASSGOD14. That is also my YouTube account, and that is also my Twitch account. So my DMs are always open. I'm always open to suggestions. If you would like us to review something for the show, or if you have some insight, like if you heard some rumors or something like that about something that we've been discussing, or the types of things we're discussing, whether it be movie news, comics, games, any of that kind of stuff. I always try to keep my ear to the ground. And then Chris Roberts said, hey, have a great night, guys. Awesome show as always. Sorry for not being more interactive. I was in a World of Warcraft group, laugh out loud. Candy Bucket, which I assume is the name of his World of Warcraft group. And we're always happy to plug other people's ventures, by the way, Chris. And then James Stone said, MOTU, which I assume means Masters of the Universe. And James, we're fans as well. And with that, we'll leave you with the last word.